Welcome, fellow dreamer. Tonight, we journey through the remarkable story of human language, from the earliest utterances of our ancient ancestors to the flourishing of writing systems, alphabets, and the thousands of tongues that have blossomed across every corner of our world. This tale comes to you accompanied by gentle music and flowing abstract visuals designed to reveal hidden wonders and captivating moments from our shared past, quietly nourishing your curiosity as you ease into restful sleep. So take a deep breath, settle into your pillows, and allow your mind and eyes to soften. Let the story carry you gently forward as you drift toward dreams. The African sun rose over an ancient landscape, casting golden light across savannas that stretched endlessly toward distant horizons. In this world, more than 2 million years ago, our early ancestors moved through grasslands and woodlands in small groups, their survival depending on their ability to work together, to understand one another, and to share what they knew about their world. Before there were words, before there was language as we know it today, there was still communication. Watch any group of people today, and you will notice something remarkable. We communicate constantly without speaking. A raised eyebrow can ask a question. A smile can offer reassurance. Open arms signal welcome, while crossed arms suggest distance. Our faces are canvases of emotion, painting pictures that others can read instantly, instinctively. These silent languages existed long before speech, and they remain with us still, woven into the fabric of how we connect with one another. Our earliest human ancestors relied heavily on these non-verbal signals. When words did not yet exist, a pointed finger could indicate direction or danger. A quick gesture might signal the approach of a predator or the discovery of ripe fruit on a distant tree. Facial expressions communicated emotions that bound groups together, creating understanding between individuals who shared no common vocabulary, because vocabulary itself had not yet been invented. Archaeological evidence suggests that these early humans were not so different from us in their need to communicate. Sites across East Africa, where our human story began, reveal patterns of cooperation that would have been impossible without some form of shared understanding. Stone tools found in layers of ancient earth show consistent manufacturing techniques, suggesting that knowledge was being passed from one generation to the next. Someone was teaching and someone was learning, even if the lessons were conducted in silence or through simple sounds and demonstrations. The human vocal apparatus evolved gradually over millions of years. Our early ancestors had vocal cords, certainly, but the position of the larynx, the shape of the mouth, and the control of the tongue and lips all underwent subtle transformations. These changes, though small when viewed across a single lifetime, accumulated over countless generations. The result was a creature uniquely suited to produce a wide range of sounds with remarkable precision and control. Scientists who study human evolution examine the fossilized remains of our ancestors, looking for clues about when speech might have become possible. The hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the neck that anchors muscles used in speech, provides valuable evidence. The shape and position of the skull base, the size of the thoracic vertebral canal that housed nerves controlling breathing, and the structure of the inner ear all offer glimpses into the physical capacity for complex vocal communication. Yet having the physical equipment for speech is one matter. Using it purposefully is quite another. Somewhere in our distant past, perhaps 300,000 years ago, perhaps more recently, our ancestors began making sounds that carried specific meanings. These were not the emotional cries that many animals produce. They were not merely expressions of fear or contentment. They were symbolic, representing things that might not be immediately present. A sound could stand for water, even when no water was visible. Another sound could mean danger, alerting others to threats they had not yet seen. This was revolutionary. Animals communicate, certainly. Birds sing territorial songs and warning calls. Wolves howl to coordinate pack movements. Primates use various vocalizations to signal different states and situations. But human language, even in its earliest forms, possessed something qualitatively different. It had the capacity for displacement, the ability to refer to things removed in time and space. One could discuss yesterday's hunt or tomorrow's journey. One could describe a place over the next hill or remember a watering hole from seasons past. The development of this capacity transformed what it meant to be human. Groups that could share information more effectively had survival advantages. They could coordinate more complex hunting strategies. They could share knowledge about which plants were nutritious and which were poisonous. They could maintain social bonds across larger groups, creating networks of cooperation that extended beyond immediate family members. Some researchers believe that language emerged suddenly, perhaps due to a genetic mutation that rewired the brain in a way that made symbolic thought and complex communication possible. Others argue for a gradual development, with simple proto-languages slowly becoming more sophisticated over tens of thousands of years. The truth, like so many aspects of deep prehistory, remains elusive, hidden in a time before writing, before any permanent records existed to guide us. What we can say with confidence is that by the time modern humans began spreading out from Africa, perhaps 70,000 years ago, they possessed language. How do we know this? The archaeological record shows a sudden flourishing of symbolic behavior. Cave paintings appeared, depicting animals and hunting scenes. Decorative objects were created, carved from bone and stone. Burial practices became more elaborate, suggesting concepts of ceremony and perhaps an afterlife. All of this points to minds capable of abstract thought and symbolic communication. Language was not merely a tool for survival. It became a repository of culture, a way of binding communities together through shared stories and collective memory. Around fires in the evening, early humans surely communicated the day's events, shared knowledge, strengthened relationships, and perhaps entertained one another. The specific words they used are lost forever, vanished into the silence of deep time. But the impulse to communicate, to share, to connect through spoken sound was already firmly established. As we close our eyes and imagine those distant campfires flickering in ancient darkness, we can almost hear the murmur of voices telling stories in languages no living person could understand. Those voices belong to people fundamentally like us, people who loved and feared, who wondered about their world, who taught their children and remembered their ancestors. They were discovering what it meant to speak, to name the world around them, to give sound and structure to human thought. Their journey was just beginning, and the path ahead would lead to thousands of languages, rich and varied, spreading across every continent, becoming one of the defining features of human civilization. The mist rises slowly over an ancient landscape, and we find ourselves standing at the edge of human memory, in a time so distant that facts blend with theory, evidence mingles with educated speculation. We are somewhere between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago, in a world where our direct ancestors walked paths we can barely trace today. Imagine, if you will, a group of early humans gathered around a fire as the African sun sets beyond the horizon. The flames flicker and dance, casting warm light on faces that would look remarkably familiar to us. These are people with brains essentially identical to our own, capable of the same thoughts, the same emotions, the same complex reasoning that we possess today. Yet something is different. The sounds emerging from their mouths exist in that mysterious territory between the simple calls we explored before and what we would recognize as true language. What were the first words? This question has captivated linguists, archaeologists, and anthropologists for generations, yet it remains one shrouded in uncertainty. Unlike stone tools or bone fragments, words leave no fossils. They evaporate into the air the moment they are spoken, leaving us to piece together their origins from indirect clues and careful reasoning. Some researchers propose that early words might have been practical labels for immediate needs. Perhaps a specific sound came to mean water, that precious resource that could mean the difference between life and death in the savannah. Another sound might have designated food or signaled the presence of danger lurking in the tall grass. These would have been concrete terms attached to things that could be seen, touched, or urgently needed. In hunter-gatherer communities spread across the African continent during this period, survival depended on cooperation and the sharing of information. A parent needed to warn a child about which plants were poisonous. Hunters needed to coordinate their movements to successfully track large animals. Groups needed ways to designate family relationships, to distinguish between my child and your child, between us and them. The fascinating question that divides scholars is whether language emerged suddenly or gradually. One camp suggests that a single genetic mutation, perhaps around 70,000 years ago, suddenly gave humans the capability for complex grammar and unlimited sentence construction. This theory, sometimes called the Great Leap Forward, proposes that language appeared relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, like a switch being flipped. Others argue for a more gradual emergence, with proto-languages developing slowly over tens of thousands of years. In this view, early humans began with simple two-word combinations, perhaps pairing a sound for an object with a sound for an action. Over generations, these simple combinations grew more sophisticated, developing rules and structures that allowed for increasingly complex communication. Consider the challenges these early speakers faced. They had no written records to preserve their words, no dictionaries to standardize meanings. Each generation had to pass their language to the next through speaking and listening alone. Yet somehow, linguistic systems not only survived, but flourished and grew more elaborate. The vocabulary that developed in these prehistoric communities likely reflected their daily existence. Words for different types of animals would have been essential, perhaps with specific terms for prey versus predators. The changing seasons would have needed names, as would different types of weather that affected hunting and gathering. Family terms would have helped organize social relationships in increasingly complex groups. Some linguists have attempted to reconstruct elements of these ancient proto-languages by looking at common features shared across all modern human languages. They search for universal patterns, hoping to glimpse something fundamental about how human language works. While controversial, some researchers have even proposed a handful of ancient word roots that might date back to these earliest times, though such claims remain heavily debated. The environment itself may have shaped how language developed. The open savannas of Africa, where sounds could carry across long distances, might have encouraged different vocal patterns than dense forests, where lower frequency sounds travel more effectively through vegetation. The size of social groups would have influenced vocabulary needs. Larger communities required more sophisticated ways to identify individuals and describe relationships. During this period, early humans were also developing increasingly sophisticated tools, creating art, and engaging in symbolic thinking. The same cognitive abilities that allowed for language also enabled these other advances. Some researchers suggest that language and tool-making may have evolved together, with the sequential thinking required for crafting complex tools related to the sequential nature of grammar. We must acknowledge the profound uncertainty that surrounds this chapter of human history. We are speaking of events that occurred before any form of writing, before pottery or agriculture, in times that existed for thousands of years longer than all of recorded history combined. The people who spoke these first words left us no recordings, no written accounts, no explicit evidence of what they said or how they said it. Yet we know they spoke. We know this because every human society ever encountered, no matter how isolated, possesses a fully developed language with complex grammar, extensive vocabulary, and the ability to express abstract concepts. This universal presence of sophisticated language suggests deep roots, reaching back to before humanity spread across the globe. As these prehistoric millennia slowly passed, the descendants of those first speakers began to move. They ventured beyond their African homeland, carrying their languages with them into new territories, encountering new environments, new challenges, and eventually new ways of speaking that would branch and diversify into the thousands of languages that would eventually circle the earth. The crackling fire that lit those ancient conversations has long since turned to ash, scattered by winds across millennia. The voices have faded into silence, but their legacy remains in every word we speak, every sentence we construct, every story we tell. In the quiet moments before sleep, we are still doing what those distant ancestors did, using the remarkable gift of language to share our thoughts, to connect with others, to make sense of the world around us. As the first words took root in the minds and mouths of early humans, something remarkable began to happen. These scattered bands of Homo sapiens, numbering perhaps only a few thousand individuals in total, started to move. The African continent, which had cradled the dawn of human speech, would not contain our ancestors for long. Between 70,000 and 60,000 years ago, small groups began to venture beyond their ancestral homeland, and with them traveled the precious gift of language. Imagine the courage it must have taken for those first explorers to leave the familiar landscapes of East Africa. They carried with them everything they needed to survive, knowledge passed down through generations, skills for hunting and gathering, and crucially, the words to describe their world. As these pioneering groups crossed into the Arabian Peninsula and beyond, they brought their languages into entirely new environments, places where different plants grew, unfamiliar animals roamed, and the very shape of the land challenged everything they had known. The journey was neither swift nor simple. Generations passed as small communities slowly spread along coastlines, following game herds, seeking new sources of food and water. Some groups moved eastward along the shores of the Indian Ocean, eventually reaching South Asia and Southeast Asia. Others turned northward into the Levant and beyond. Each migration created distance, and distance began its quiet work of transformation upon language. When a group of perhaps 50 or 100 individuals became separated from their cousins by hundreds of miles and many years, their language began to drift. The words they used for familiar things might remain similar, but new experiences demanded new vocabulary. In the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, speakers needed words for creatures and plants that simply did not exist in the African savanna. Along rocky coastlines, fishing communities developed rich vocabularies for tides, shellfish, and the moods of the sea. In the cooler climates to the north, groups needed words for snow and ice, concepts that would have been meaningless to their ancestors, who had never left Africa's warmth. This diversification happened naturally, almost imperceptibly. Children would slightly mispronounce words they learned from their parents, and these small variations might become established patterns. When groups had no contact with one another for hundreds of years, even simple words for basic concepts began to sound different. The word for water in one community might gradually shift its sounds until it bore little resemblance to the word used by a distant cousin group, even though both populations had descended from the same original speakers. Geography played an extraordinary role in shaping these linguistic transformations. Mountain ranges acted as barriers, creating pockets of isolation where languages could evolve independently for thousands of years. Rivers created natural boundaries, with communities on opposite banks sometimes developing distinct ways of speaking, despite living within sight of one another. Islands once reached by sea became linguistic laboratories where small populations developed their own unique ways of expressing ideas, cut off from the influences that might have kept their speech aligned with mainland relatives. The sounds themselves were influenced by the environment. Some scholars have suggested that languages developing in dense forests, where sound does not carry far, might favor certain tones and frequencies that travel well through vegetation. Languages of open plains might develop differently, optimized for communication across greater distances. While we cannot be certain of these ancient adaptations, we do know that the astonishing variety of human languages today reflects tens of thousands of years of communities adapting to their specific environments. By 40,000 years ago, human groups had reached Australia, crossing stretches of open ocean that required sophisticated planning and cooperation. The languages they brought with them began their own long journey of evolution, developing in complete isolation from developments occurring in Africa, Asia, and Europe. When these populations were finally contacted by European explorers tens of thousands of years later, their languages had become entirely unique, sharing deep ancestral connections with other human languages, but having evolved along their own distinctive paths. Meanwhile, other groups pushed northward into Europe and across the vast expanses of Central Asia. The challenging climate of the Ice Age meant that human populations were often small and scattered, seeking refuge in more hospitable regions during the coldest periods. These cycles of expansion and contraction, of isolation and occasional contact, created complex patterns of linguistic diversity. Languages borrowed from one another when groups met, traded, or merged. They diverged when ice sheets or rising seas separated populations for millennia. Perhaps the most remarkable migration brought humans to the Americas. Sometime between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago, groups crossed from northeastern Asia into Alaska, likely traveling along coastlines and through ice-free corridors. These travelers brought their languages with them, and as they spread throughout North and South America over the following thousands of years, their speech diversified into hundreds of distinct language families, each uniquely adapted to the environments their speakers inhabited. The Pacific Islands received their human inhabitants much later, between 3,000 and 1,000 years ago, as sophisticated seafaring peoples navigated vast ocean distances using the stars, currents, and flight patterns of birds. Each island or island group that was settled became home to new linguistic variations, creating a tapestry of related but distinct languages spread across thousands of miles of ocean. Through all these migrations and transformations, certain deep structures may have been preserved. Linguists continue to debate whether traces of the original human language might still be detectable in modern languages, hidden beneath tens of thousands of years of change. Some suggest that basic words, particularly for family relationships or body parts, might show subtle connections across otherwise unrelated language families. Others remain skeptical, noting that 50,000 years is more than enough time for any original similarities to be completely obscured. What remains certain is that the great diaspora of humanity across the continents created the conditions for the extraordinary linguistic diversity we see today. From a single population with perhaps a single language or closely related group of languages, humans spread across the entire habitable world, and their languages blossomed into thousands of distinct forms, each carrying the history of its speakers' journeys, adaptations, and experiences across countless generations. As early humans spread across the vast expanses of Earth, their languages began to diverge and evolve, splitting and branching like the limbs of an ancient tree. Today, we can look at the more than 7,000 languages spoken around our world and recognize patterns within them, connections that reveal deep ancestral relationships, stretching back thousands of years into the mists of time. These patterns tell us something profound. Languages are not isolated entities, but members of families, descendants of mother tongues spoken long before any writing system existed to preserve their words. Imagine for a moment a single language spoken by a community, perhaps 10,000 years ago. As generations passed and groups of speakers migrated to new territories, becoming separated by mountains, rivers, or simply vast distances, their speech would gradually change. Children in one valley might pronounce certain sounds differently from their cousins across the mountain range. New words would be invented for new things encountered in different environments. Over centuries and millennia, these small changes would accumulate, like sediment layers building up on an ancient seabed, until the speech of the separated communities would become mutually unintelligible. Two distinct languages would have emerged where once there was one. This process has repeated itself countless times throughout human history, creating what linguists call language families. The concept itself is beautifully simple. Languages that share a common ancestor are related to one another, much as human family members share a common bloodline. By comparing vocabulary, grammar, and sound patterns across different languages, scholars can reconstruct family trees of linguistic descent, tracing relationships that may stretch back 6,000 or 7,000 years, and sometimes even further into the shadows of prehistory. The largest and perhaps most studied of these families is Indo-European, a vast linguistic family whose descendants are spoken today from Iceland to Sri Lanka, from Ireland to India. Scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries noticed something curious. Words in Sanskrit, the ancient language of India, bore striking resemblances to words in Latin, Greek, and other European languages. The Sanskrit word for father, pitar, echoed the Latin pater, the Greek pater, the Persian pedar, and the English father. The word for mother showed similar patterns. Matar in Sanskrit, mater in Latin, mater in Greek, mother in English. These were not random coincidences, but evidence of a shared heritage. This ancestral language, which scholars call Proto-Indo-European, was never written down. It existed perhaps 6,000 years ago, possibly spoken by pastoral peoples on the steppes north of the Black Sea, though the exact homeland remains a subject of gentle scholarly debate. From this mother tongue descended the many branches we know today, the Romance languages like Spanish, French, and Italian, all children of Latin. The Germanic languages including English, German, and Swedish. The Slavic languages such as Russian, Polish, and Serbian. And the Indo-Iranian branch encompassing Persian, Hindi, Bengali, and dozens of other languages across Central and South Asia. But Indo-European is just one family among many. In East Asia, the Sino-Tibetan family encompasses both Chinese in its many forms and the Tibetan and Burmese languages, spoken by hundreds of millions of people across a vast geographic range. Chinese itself, though often spoken of as a single language, is more accurately described as a group of related languages united by a common writing system, but divided by spoken variations that can differ as much as French differs from Spanish. Africa, that cradle of humanity, displays breathtaking linguistic diversity. The Afro-Asiatic family includes Arabic, Hebrew, and Amharic, as well as the ancient Egyptian language of the pharaohs, now preserved only in texts and monuments. The Niger-Congo family spreads across much of sub-Saharan Africa and includes Swahili, Yoruba, and Zulu among its hundreds of member languages. The clicking sounds found in some southern African languages, unique and striking to outsiders' ears, remind us that human speech can explore sonic territories far beyond what any single culture considers normal. In the Americas, before European contact, hundreds of distinct language families had developed, each representing thousands of years of separate evolution. The Uto-Aztecan family linked the language of the Aztec Empire with languages spoken far to the north in what is now the western United States. The Algonquian languages spread across much of North America's northern forests and plains. Each family represented a unique thread in the great tapestry of human expression. The Austronesian language family tells a remarkable story of maritime expansion. From a homeland in Taiwan, speakers of Austronesian languages settled the islands of the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, eventually voyaging across vast stretches of the Pacific Ocean to colonize Polynesia and westward to the island of Madagascar off Africa's coast. Today, Austronesian languages are spoken across half the circumference of Earth, from Madagascar to Easter Island, united by words and grammatical patterns that echo their shared origin. Linguists trace these family relationships through careful comparison, looking for what they call cognates, words in different languages that share a common origin. They examine not just whether words sound similar now, but whether they follow predictable sound change patterns. Languages change their sounds in systematic ways over time, and by understanding these patterns, scholars can work backward through history, reconstructing words and even grammatical structures from languages that vanished thousands of years before writing was invented to preserve them. Some languages, however, stand alone, mysterious orphans without clear relatives. Basque, spoken in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, appears to have no demonstrable relationship to any other known language. It may be the last surviving remnant of the languages spoken in Europe before Indo-European speakers arrived. Such linguistic isolates remind us that many languages have left no descendants, their speakers eventually shifting to the tongues of their neighbors, leaving only ghosts and gaps in our understanding. The study of language families reveals both diversity and unity in human experience. While we speak thousands of different languages today, they cluster into families and groups, branches of larger trees that once grew from common roots. This pattern reflects our shared history as a species, the ancient migrations and separations that distributed our ancestors across every habitable continent, and the creative capacity of human communities to shape and reshape their languages across countless generations. As we rest here, considering these vast family trees of speech, we might reflect on how each language carries within it an echo of all the voices that came before, generations of speakers stretching back into the depths of time, each adding their small innovations, their new words, their subtle shifts in pronunciation, gradually transforming what they inherited and passing something slightly different to their children. In this way, language becomes a living river, constantly flowing and changing, yet maintaining continuity with its ancient sources in the high mountains of our shared human past. As we journey forward through time, we arrive at a landscape transformed by human settlement and innovation. The wandering groups of our distant ancestors have given way to something entirely new. Permanent communities clustered along the banks of great rivers where the soil is rich and water flows abundantly. Here, in the land between two rivers, a civilization rises that will give voice to one of humanity's earliest recorded languages. Picture the landscape of ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, around 5,500 years ago. The sun rises over flat plains where irrigation channels carry water to fields of barley and wheat. Mud brick buildings cluster together in growing settlements that will soon become the world's first true cities. This is where Sumerian, one of the earliest languages we can actually read and study, flourished in the mouths of farmers, priests, merchants, and kings. The Sumerians themselves called their language imagery, which means something like the native tongue. Unlike the languages we explored in previous chapters, which we can only theorize about through reconstruction and comparison, Sumerian has left us tangible evidence. But before writing captured these words in clay, the language lived and breathed in the daily life of southern Mesopotamia, carried on the voices of people who were building something unprecedented in human history. Imagine walking through the streets of Uruk, one of the great Sumerian cities around 3500 BCE. The air carries the scent of baking bread and the earthy smell of wet clay. Voices fill the narrow passages between buildings, speaking words that express a world growing more complex with each generation. A woman calls out to her neighbor about barley prices. A priest discusses temple offerings with his assistant. Children play games with rules passed down through countless retellings. Each conversation weaves together sounds and meanings that have evolved over thousands of years. The Sumerian vocabulary reflected a society moving far beyond the hunter-gatherer existence of earlier peoples. These were farmers who needed precise words for different types of grain, for the stages of plant growth, for irrigation techniques and harvest times. They were city dwellers who required terms for streets and houses, for different craftspeople and their specialties, for neighborhood districts and public spaces. Listen to some of these ancient words as they might have sounded in the warm Mesopotamian air. Dub meant tablet, the clay surface that would soon carry written words. Jiu was flax, the plant that provided linen for clothing. Chiudi referred to a bull or ox, essential for ploughing fields. Arga meant crown, a concept that emerged as social hierarchies became formalized. Each word carried weight and meaning, born from practical necessity and cultural development. The grammar of Sumerian was unlike the Indo-European languages we discussed in earlier chapters. This was what linguists call an agglutinative language, where words build meaning by stacking meaningful units together like building blocks. A single Sumerian word might express what would take an entire phrase in English, with suffixes indicating subject, object, location, and action all bound together in one flowing sound. In the temples rising above these cities, priests developed specialized religious vocabulary. They needed words for rituals, for offerings, for the names and attributes of gods. The Sumerians populated their cosmos with deities connected to natural forces and human concerns. An, the sky god, Enlil, the god of wind and storms. Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Each divine name carried stories and associations that shaped how people understood their world. Trade brought the Sumerians into contact with neighboring peoples, and their language began to absorb and exchange words with surrounding tongues. Merchants traveling to distant lands for timber, precious stones and metals needed ways to communicate across linguistic boundaries. The Sumerian word for certain goods might be borrowed from trading partners, while Sumerian terms for new innovations spread to other languages in return. In the marketplaces, a rich vocabulary of commerce developed. Words for weighing and measuring, for different qualities of goods, for agreements and transactions. The complexity of trade was pushing the limits of what memory alone could track. A merchant needed to remember who owed what, which shipments were expected, what prices had been agreed upon. The human mind is remarkably capable, but as Sumerian society grew more intricate, the burden on memory grew heavier. Family life had its own lexicon. The Sumerians had specific terms for different family relationships, reflecting the importance of kinship in organizing their society. Words distinguished between older and younger siblings, between maternal and paternal relatives, between relationships by blood and by marriage. These weren't just labels, but markers of social obligation and connection. The natural world around them gave rise to countless terms, names for the date palms that provided food and building materials, for the reeds that grew in marshy areas and could be woven into mats and boats, for the different birds that nested along the rivers, for fish that could be caught and dried. The vocabulary of daily survival remained essential, even as city life introduced new concerns. As settlements grew into true cities, administrative needs multiplied. Temple complexes managed vast holdings of land and livestock, distributed rations to workers, organized large-scale construction projects. Leaders needed ways to track resources, plan for the future, and maintain records of decisions and distributions. Someone might remember what was agreed last week. But what about last year or 10 years ago? What happens when the person who remembers passes away, taking their knowledge with them? Children growing up in these Sumerian cities learned their language in the same way children always have, through immersion and imitation, through play and instruction. But they were learning to express ideas and engage with a world their ancestors could never have imagined. They learned words for occupations that hadn't existed a few generations earlier. They learned to navigate social structures more complex than the small bands of the deep past. The priests and administrators of these growing city-states found themselves managing increasingly elaborate systems. The temple storehouses held goods received from farmers and craftspeople. These resources were redistributed to support temple workers, priests, and community projects. But human memory, however well trained, has limits. How many jars of oil came in this month? How many were distributed? How much should be reserved for next season's planting? This is the world where Sumerian thrived in its spoken form, a language fully capable of expressing the needs and dreams of a complex civilization. In evening gatherings, storytellers wove tales in Sumerian words, passing down myths and legends that explained how the world came to be. In the cool of the morning, farmers discussed their fields in time-tested terminology. Throughout the day, The language flowed through every interaction, every transaction, every moment of human connection. The stage was set for a transformation that would change not just Sumerian, but the entire trajectory of human communication. The complexity of civilization had created a problem that memory alone could no longer solve. The solution, emerging in these very Mesopotamian cities, would be nothing less than the invention of writing itself. The warm breeze drifted across the Mesopotamian plain, carrying with it the scent of ripening barley and the distant murmur of the Euphrates. In the bustling city of Uruk, something extraordinary was about to unfold that would change the course of human civilization forever. Around 3200 BCE, as the Sumerian cities grew larger and more complex, the limitations of human memory became increasingly apparent. Temple administrators faced an overwhelming challenge. How could they possibly remember every transaction, every delivery of grain, every allocation of livestock, every worker's ration? Imagine standing in the courtyard of a great temple storehouse, watching as merchants arrive with their goods. Clay jars filled with oil, baskets of dates, bundles of wool, all needed to be recorded, tracked, and accounted for. The priests and administrators had developed an ingenious temporary solution. They used small clay tokens, each shaped to represent different commodities. A cone might represent grain, a sphere might represent oil, an egg-shaped token could stand for a jar of beer. These tokens had been used for thousands of years, passed back and forth, stored in containers as a kind of three-dimensional accounting system. But as trade expanded and society grew more intricate, even this system strained under the weight of information. Someone needed to remember what each collection of tokens represented when the transaction occurred, and which merchant or farmer was involved. The solution emerged not from a single brilliant mind, but gradually, organically, from the practical needs of daily commerce. A scribe, perhaps sitting in the shade of a temple wall, pressed one of these tokens into a soft clay tablet, creating an impression. The token's shape left its mark in the clay, a permanent record that would harden and endure. This simple act was revolutionary. Instead of storing the actual tokens, one could simply press them into clay and create a lasting image. The tablet could be dried in the sun, and the record would survive. These earliest marks were straightforward pictographs, simple pictures representing real objects. A circular impression with lines might represent a sheep. Multiple marks could indicate multiple items. The clay itself was abundant along the riverbanks, free for the taking, easily shaped while wet, and remarkably durable once dried. Mesopotamia had no forests for paper, no abundance of stone for carving, but it had endless supplies of clay, and this humble material would become the canvas for humanity's first written words. Over the following centuries, something remarkable happened. The scribes of Mesopotamia began to refine their system. The simple pictures became more abstract, more stylized. Instead of drawing curved lines that were difficult to make in clay, they discovered that pressing a reed stylus into the soft surface created clean, wedge-shaped marks. These wedges could be combined in different ways to represent the original pictures, but faster and more uniformly. This is what we now call cuneiform, from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge. The transformation from picture to symbol marked a profound cognitive leap. A drawing of a foot might originally mean just that, a foot. But over time, it could also represent the concept of walking, or going, or even standing. The scribes began to use signs not just for the objects they depicted, but for the sounds of the words those objects represented. This rebus principle, using pictures to represent sounds rather than things, opened up entirely new possibilities. Consider the challenge these ancient scribes faced. The Sumerian language contained many abstract concepts that were difficult to draw. How do you picture friendship, or justice, or tomorrow? By using symbols for their sound values, scribes could combine signs to spell out words phonetically. Just as we might draw a picture of an eye and a saw to represent "I saw." This meant that virtually any word in the Sumerian language could now be written down. The clay tablets multiplied across Mesopotamia. In the cool, shadowy rooms of temples and palaces, scribes sat cross-legged on reed mats, their tablets propped on their knees, carefully pressing their styluses into the clay. The tablets recorded everything: deliveries of grain measured in specific units, lists of workers and their rations, contracts for the sale of fields and houses, even letters sent between cities. One tablet might record that a merchant named Ea Nasir delivered copper of inferior quality, a complaint preserved for over 4,000 years. Writing schools emerged where young boys, for it seems most scribes were male, learned the hundreds of cuneiform signs through endless repetition. Students practiced on discarded clay tablets, copying standard texts, learning the signs for syllables, memorizing the complex system that could now express the full richness of human thought and speech. To be a scribe was to hold a prestigious position in society, to be among the tiny fraction of the population who possessed this powerful skill. The implications rippled outward through time. Before writing, laws existed only in memory, passed down orally, subject to the limitations and biases of individual recall. Now laws could be written down, made permanent, consulted, and referenced. The famous Law Code of Hammurabi, though written several centuries after the invention of cuneiform, exemplifies this new possibility. Laws displayed publicly, consistent and enduring. Stories that had been told and retold around fires for generations could now be captured in clay. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest surviving works of literature, comes to us on cuneiform tablets, its hero's quest for immortality preserved in wedge-shaped marks. The thoughts of people long dead speak to us still, their words frozen in hardened clay, pulled from the earth by archaeologists thousands of years later. Writing created a new relationship with time itself. Before writing, human knowledge was limited to what could be remembered and passed down through the generations. Each person's death meant the loss of everything they alone knew. But now, knowledge could accumulate, building upon itself, generation after generation. A merchant could consult records from his grandfather's time. A priest could read rituals recorded centuries earlier. Human civilization had developed an external memory, one that could grow infinitely larger than any individual mind. As the sun set over ancient Uruk, casting long shadows across the ziggurat, scribes carefully stored their completed tablets in archives, arranging them on shelves, organizing humanity's growing collection of recorded thought. They could not have known that they were creating something that would survive millennia, that people in an unimaginably distant future would puzzle over these marks, eventually deciphering them, bringing ancient voices back to life. The soft clay had given humanity something precious beyond measure, the ability to speak across time, to preserve thoughts and knowledge beyond the fragile limits of human memory. The age of writing had begun, and the world would never be the same. As the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia were being pressed into clay, another civilization along the fertile banks of the Nile River was developing its own remarkable system of writing. The ancient Egyptians, who had watched their river flood and recede with dependable rhythm for countless generations, began around 3100 BCE to create one of history's most visually stunning writing systems: hieroglyphs. The very word hieroglyph comes to us from the Greek, meaning sacred carvings. And indeed, the Egyptians themselves called their script Medu Neter, or words of the gods. From the very beginning, this writing system was imbued with a sense of divine beauty and purpose that would endure for more than 3,000 years. Unlike the wedge-shaped impressions of cuneiform that evolved from practical accounting needs, Egyptian hieroglyphs emerged with an artistic sophistication that suggests they may have been developed partly for monumental and ceremonial purposes. The earliest examples we have discovered appear on ceremonial palettes and mace heads, objects of ritual significance rather than everyday commerce. The famous Narmer palette, dated to approximately 3100 BCE, displays some of the earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions commemorating the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Picture, if you will, a warm Egyptian afternoon in the age of the pyramids. The sun casts long shadows across limestone walls covered in precisely carved symbols. A falcon represents the god Horus. A seated man with a flail denotes royalty. An owl stands for the sound M, while a foot means to go or to come. These weren't merely pictures or simple representations. The Egyptian writing system was wonderfully complex, combining 3 distinct types of signs in a single script. Some hieroglyphs were ideograms, representing the actual object depicted. A circle with a dot in the center meant sun and could also represent the sun god Ra. Other symbols were phonograms, representing sounds rather than meanings, much like our own letters. That owl we mentioned, shaped beautifully with detailed feathers and an alert expression, didn't mean owl at all to a scribe, but simply made the sound M. Still other signs served as determinatives, silent symbols placed at the end of words to clarify their meaning, like a silent guide helping readers understand whether a word referred to an action, a person, or an abstract concept. This elegant complexity meant that learning to read and write hieroglyphs required years of dedicated study. In ancient Egypt, this knowledge was the province of a special class of professionals, the scribes. These individuals occupied a privileged position in Egyptian society, somewhere between the common people and the nobility. A young person training to become a scribe would begin their education around the age of 5 or 6, spending years copying texts, memorizing hundreds of symbols, and learning the intricate rules governing their use. The life of a scribe was one of relative comfort compared to the farmers who labored in the fields or the workers who hauled stones for the great construction projects. Ancient Egyptian texts that have survived often praise the profession of the scribe. One text, known as the Satire of the Trades, humorously describes the hardships of various occupations while extolling the virtues of being a scribe. No heavy lifting, no calloused hands, no baking in the sun. Instead, the scribe worked in the shade, wielding brush and palette rather than plough and hoe. These scribes used a variety of materials depending on the purpose of their writing. For monumental inscriptions meant to last for eternity, hieroglyphs were carefully carved into stone temple walls, obelisks, and tomb chambers. The stone carvers who executed these inscriptions were skilled artisans in their own right, translating the scribe's design into permanent form with copper chisels and wooden mallets, working the hard granite and limestone with patient precision. For everyday documents, accounts, letters, and records, scribes used a more practical medium: papyrus. This remarkable material was made from the papyrus plant that grew abundantly in the marshy areas along the Nile. The stems were cut into thin strips, laid in perpendicular layers, pressed together, and dried to create smooth sheets perfect for writing. Using a brush made from reed stems, scribes would dip into cakes of black ink made from soot or red ink made from ochre, creating the documents that recorded the daily business of one of history's greatest civilizations. For these everyday purposes, the Egyptians developed a simplified, more flowing version of hieroglyphs called hieratic script. Where formal hieroglyphs were carefully drawn with attention to artistic detail, hieratics was cursive and quick, allowing scribes to write more rapidly. Even later, around 700 BCE, an even more abbreviated form called demotic emerged for common use. Yet throughout all these millennia, the formal hieroglyphic script remained in use for sacred and monumental purposes, unchanging and eternal as the stones on which they were carved. The Egyptian language recorded by these hieroglyphs was itself a member of the Afro-Asiatic language family, related distantly to Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic. It possessed its own unique grammar and vocabulary, evolved over thousands of years along the Nile's banks. Interestingly, like some Semitic languages, Egyptian writing typically didn't include vowels. Scribes wrote only the consonants, and readers were expected to know which vowel sounds to supply, much as a modern reader might understand BK to mean book or back, depending on context. The content recorded in hieroglyphs ranged from the sublime to the mundane. There were hymns to the gods, prayers for the afterlife, and the spells of the Book of the Dead, meant to guide souls through the underworld. There were also tax records, grain accounts, worker attendance logs, and legal documents. On tomb walls, hieroglyphs told the stories of the deceased, listing their titles, accomplishments, and the offerings that should be made to sustain their spirit in eternity. One of the most remarkable aspects of hieroglyphic writing was its flexibility in arrangement. Unlike our own writing, which flows strictly from left to right, hieroglyphs could be written from right to left, left to right, or even in vertical columns from top to bottom. The direction of reading was indicated by the orientation of the symbols themselves. If human and animal figures faced right, you read from right to left. If they faced left, you read from left to right. This flexibility allowed scribes and artists to arrange texts for maximum aesthetic effect, creating harmonious compositions on temple walls and tomb chambers. As we rest here, contemplating these ancient symbols carved into golden stone, we can appreciate how the Egyptians created a writing system that was simultaneously practical and beautiful, functional and sacred. For over 3,000 years, hieroglyphs served Egyptian civilization, adapting slowly over the centuries, yet maintaining their essential character until the closing of the last pagan temples in the early centuries of the Common Era. The knowledge of how to read these elegant symbols was eventually lost, remaining a tantalizing mystery until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 finally provided the key to decipherment. But that is a story for another time. For now, let us simply appreciate how the ancient Egyptians transformed their spoken language into visual poetry, creating a writing system as enduring as the pyramids themselves. As we leave the banks of the Nile and the intricate world of Egyptian hieroglyphs, we must now turn our attention eastward across vast deserts and mountain ranges to another ancient civilization that was simultaneously developing its own remarkable approach to capturing language in written form. In the valleys and plains of ancient China, along the Yellow River and its tributaries, a writing system was emerging that would prove to be one of the most enduring and influential in human history. The story of Chinese writing begins in the mists of the Shang dynasty, around 1200 BCE. Though, like many origin stories, the truth likely stretches back even further into time. The earliest definitive evidence we have comes from oracle bones, fragments of turtle shells and ox shoulder blades that were used in divination rituals by Shang dynasty priests and rulers. These bones tell us something profound about the relationship between writing, power, and the spiritual world in ancient China. Imagine, if you will, a royal court in the capital of Anyang. A king wishes to know whether the harvest will be favorable, whether an enemy will attack, or whether an ancestor's spirit is pleased with recent offerings. The diviner would carefully inscribe a question onto a prepared bone or shell using a sharp tool. The bone would then be heated until cracks appeared on its surface, and these cracks would be interpreted as answers from the spiritual realm. Crucially, both the question and often the answer would be inscribed on the bone itself, creating a permanent record of this communication between the human and spirit worlds. These oracle bone inscriptions represent something extraordinary. Here we find over 3,000 distinct characters, already showing a sophisticated understanding of how to represent the Chinese language visually. Some characters were clearly pictographic, simple drawings of the objects they represented. A character for sun might show a circle with a dot in the center. The character for tree resembled a tree with branches and roots. The character for mountain showed peaks rising from the earth. But Chinese writing was never purely pictographic. Even in these earliest examples, we can see characters that represent abstract ideas, actions, and sounds. Some characters combine multiple elements to create new meanings. The character for brightness might combine the symbols for sun and moon. The character for forest might show 2 or 3 trees together. This principle of combining simpler elements to create more complex meanings would become fundamental to how Chinese writing would develop over the following millennia. As the centuries passed and dynasties rose and fell, Chinese characters evolved in their appearance but retained their essential nature. During the Zhou dynasty, which followed the Shang, writing began to spread beyond the exclusive realm of royal divination. Bronze vessels were cast with lengthy inscriptions commemorating important events, recording dedications to ancestors, or documenting legal agreements. The script used on these bronzes showed regional variations, as different parts of the Zhou realm developed their own stylistic preferences. By the time of the Warring States period, around the 5th to 3rd centuries BCE, China was politically fragmented, and this fragmentation was reflected in the diversity of writing styles across different regions. Yet despite these variations in how characters were drawn, the underlying system remained recognizable across territories. A scholar from one state could generally read texts from another, even if the handwriting looked somewhat different. The true revolution in standardizing Chinese writing came with the Qin dynasty's unification of China under Emperor Qin Shi Huang in 221 BCE. Among his many centralizing reforms, the emperor ordered the standardization of the written script across his newly unified empire. This standardization, known as the Small Seal Script, was a momentous achievement. For the first time, Chinese characters had an officially sanctioned form that would be used throughout the realm for administrative purposes. Following the brief Qin dynasty, the Han dynasty refined the script further into what we call clerical script, and later into regular script, which forms the basis of modern Chinese characters. By the Han period, writing had become central to Chinese culture and administration. The imperial examination system, which would endure for centuries, demanded literacy in classical Chinese texts. Scholars devoted their lives to mastering the thousands of characters necessary to read the Confucian classics and other important works. What makes Chinese characters fundamentally different from the alphabetic systems that were developing elsewhere in the world is their logographic nature. Each character represents a meaningful unit, a morpheme, rather than just a sound. This means that Chinese writing is not primarily about recording how words sound, but about recording meaning directly. A single character can often express what might require several letters, or an entire word in an alphabetic system. This characteristic gave Chinese writing remarkable staying power across time and space. As the Chinese language evolved and regional dialects diverged to the point of mutual unintelligibility in speech, the written language remained a unifying force. A text written 1,000 years ago, while perhaps difficult to understand fully without training, was still fundamentally readable to an educated person, even if the ancient spoken language would have been incomprehensible. Two people speaking mutually unintelligible dialects could communicate perfectly through writing. The number of Chinese characters grew over time as the language needed to express increasingly complex ideas and distinguish between more concepts. Classical dictionaries might contain anywhere from 9,000 to over 50,000 characters. though a well-educated person might know 5 to 8,000. Literacy in imperial China required years of dedicated study and memorization, making it largely the preserve of those with the time and resources for extensive education. Chinese writing also spread beyond China's borders, carrying with it not just a script, but a whole literary tradition. Korea, Japan, and Vietnam all adopted Chinese characters, adapting them to their own languages in various ways. In Japan, Chinese characters called kanji were supplemented with phonetic scripts to handle Japanese grammar. In Korea, characters were used alongside and eventually largely replaced by the Korean Hangul alphabet. In Vietnam, characters were used until the 20th century, when Romanization became standard. The influence of Chinese characters on East Asian civilization cannot be overstated. They were the medium through which Buddhist texts spread, through which Confucian philosophy was transmitted, through which poetry and history and scientific knowledge flowed across borders and through centuries. The shared written language created a cultural sphere that transcended political boundaries and spoken language differences. As we rest here in contemplation of these ancient characters, some of which are still in use today, virtually unchanged from their forms 3,000 years ago, we can appreciate the remarkable achievement they represent. The Chinese writing system stands as testament to a different path in humanity's quest to capture language, one that prioritized meaning over sound, one that created unity across diversity, one that has endured through millennia of change. And yet, as we shall soon discover, another approach was simultaneously emerging in distant lands, an approach that would simplify writing in a revolutionary way and make it accessible as never before. As the Chinese were perfecting their intricate system of thousands of characters, carved into bronze and bone, another transformation was quietly taking shape far to the west. In the lands surrounding the eastern Mediterranean, where traders and merchants crossed paths between Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean, a remarkably simple idea was about to change the course of human communication forever. The year was approximately 1800 years before the Common Era. The place was the Levant, that narrow strip of land connecting Africa and Asia, where the Mediterranean Sea meets ancient trade routes. Here, among Semitic-speaking peoples engaged in commerce and correspondence, someone made a brilliant observation. Instead of using hundreds of symbols to represent entire words or syllables, what if you could break spoken language down into its most basic sounds and assign each sound its own simple mark? This was the birth of the alphabet, though its inventors could hardly have imagined how profoundly their innovation would reshape human civilization. The earliest alphabetic writing we can trace emerged from the minds of people who were intimately familiar with both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform. They understood the complexity of these systems, the years of training required to master them, and the way this complexity concentrated literacy in the hands of specialized scribes. What they created was something radically different, refreshingly elegant in its simplicity. The Proto-Sinaitic script, as scholars now call these earliest alphabetic experiments, appeared in inscriptions left by Semitic workers in the Sinai Peninsula. These marks, scratched into stone, represented a conceptual leap. Each symbol stood for a single consonant sound. The principle was so straightforward, that it seems almost obvious in hindsight, yet it had eluded humanity for thousands of years of writing, where Egyptian scribes needed to master hundreds of hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian scribes thousands of cuneiform signs. This new system required learning fewer than 30 symbols. Picture the Mediterranean world of 3,000 years ago, as twilight settles over coastal cities. Ships creak in harbors, their holds filled with cedar wood, purple dye, olive oil, and wine. Merchants from different lands gather in lamplit rooms, negotiating prices, recording transactions. In this multilingual world of trade, the efficiency of the alphabet became immediately apparent. A merchant's son could learn to read and write in months rather than years. Messages could be quickly scratched onto pottery shards or pressed into wax tablets. The written word was beginning its journey from the exclusive domain of priests and palace scribes into broader reaches of society. The Phoenicians, those remarkable seafaring traders, whose purple-dyed fabrics were prized throughout the ancient world, refined and standardized this alphabetic system around 1100 years before the Common Era. Their alphabet consisted of 22 consonants, written from right to left, each letter's name beginning with the sound it represented. Aleph for the glottal stop, Beth for the B sound, Gimel for G, and so forth. The letter shapes themselves evolved from simplified pictographs. Aleph, meaning ox, began as a simple representation of an ox's head. Beth, meaning house, originated from a square shape suggesting a floor plan. Over time, these pictorial origins faded as the letters became increasingly abstract, valued purely for the sounds they represented. Phoenician traders carried their alphabet wherever their ships sailed, from the Atlantic coasts of Spain to the shores of North Africa, from Sicily to Cyprus. At every port, the practical advantages of this writing system became evident. Unlike cuneiform, which required soft clay and specialized styluses, or hieroglyphs, which demanded careful brushwork or precise carving, the alphabet could be written with almost any implement on almost any surface. Scratch it in wax, paint it on pottery, carve it quickly into stone. The medium no longer dictated the complexity of the message. In quiet scriptoriums and busy marketplaces, on temple walls and merchant receipts, the alphabet spread. Each letter was a building block, and with just 22 blocks, you could construct any word in the language. Children learning to write no longer faced years of memorizing thousands of symbols. The democratization of literacy had begun, though it would take centuries to fully unfold. The genius of the alphabet lay not just in its simplicity, but in its flexibility. Unlike Chinese characters, which were intimately tied to the Chinese language, or cuneiform, which was bound to Mesopotamian tongues, the alphabetic principle could be adapted to represent almost any language. The basic insight that you could break speech into individual sound units and assign each a symbol transcended any particular tongue. This portability would prove to be one of the alphabet's most powerful features. As night deepens over the ancient world, imagine a Phoenician merchant teaching his daughter to write her name. He draws the letters carefully in the sand, pronouncing each sound. She repeats them, tracing the shapes with her finger. In this simple scene lies a revolution. Her grandfather, perhaps, had been illiterate, dependent on scribes to record his business dealings. Her father learned to write through years of effort. She will master it almost as naturally as she learned to speak. The alphabet did not replace older writing systems immediately. Egyptian hieroglyphs continued to adorn temple walls for centuries. Mesopotamian cuneiform persisted in scholarly and administrative contexts. Chinese characters flourished and evolved, but the alphabet had introduced something new into the world, a writing system that could be learned quickly, used flexibly, and adapted broadly. It was a tool that would eventually carry human knowledge across continents and through millennia. In the markets of Tyre and Sidon, on the decks of ships, cutting through Mediterranean waters, in the correspondence between distant trading partners, the alphabet proved its worth every day. Each letter stood ready to combine with others, forming syllables and words, sentences and stories. 22 simple symbols contained within them the power to record laws and poetry, accounts and histories, prayers and proclamations. As we rest here, contemplating this ancient innovation, we can almost hear the scratch of stylus on wax, the quiet concentration of someone forming letters for the first time, the satisfaction of a thought captured in a handful of elegant marks. The alphabet had arrived, and though its inventors could not have known it, they had given humanity a gift that would outlast empires and transform the transmission of knowledge itself. The letters they shaped would travel further than any Phoenician ship, carrying ideas into a future they could barely imagine. The Phoenician alphabet had opened a doorway to a new world of literacy, where sounds could be captured with elegant simplicity. This remarkable innovation would not remain confined to the eastern Mediterranean shores where it was born. Like seeds carried on the wind, these letters would travel westward across the sea, finding fertile ground among a people who would transform them once again, creating something that would echo through millennia. Around 800 BCE, Greek traders and travelers encountered the Phoenician writing system. The Greeks, scattered across the Aegean islands and the Mediterranean coastline, were already a people of stories and songs. Their oral traditions preserved epic tales and genealogies, passed from generation to generation through the voices of poets and storytellers. Yet they recognized something profoundly useful in the Phoenician letters, a tool that could preserve their words not just in memory, but in permanent form. The Greeks did not simply copy what they found. They adapted it, improved it, made it their own. The Phoenician alphabet had been designed for a Semitic language, one built largely on consonant sounds, but Greek required something more. The Greek language flowed with vowel sounds that gave it its distinctive music, and these needed representation. So the Greeks took several Phoenician letters that represented sounds not present in Greek and reassigned them. Aleph became alpha. He became epsilon. These additions of dedicated vowel letters created the first true alphabet in the modern sense, a system where both consonants and vowels stood as equals, each with their own symbols. This innovation might seem small, but its consequences rippled outward, like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Writing became more precise, more capable of capturing the exact sounds of spoken words. The ambiguity that had existed in earlier writing systems diminished. A reader could now sound out words with greater accuracy, even words they had never encountered before. The Greek alphabet spread across the Hellenic world with the movement of trade and colonization. Different regions developed their own variations, local scripts that reflected the diversity of Greek dialects. In marketplaces and harbors, on pottery and stone, Greek letters began to appear. But writing was still not an everyday skill for most people. It remained the domain of the educated, the wealthy, the professional scribes who had the time and resources to master the art. As centuries passed, Greek civilization flourished. Athens became a beacon of learning, drawing thinkers and students from across the known world. The Greek alphabet proved itself admirably suited to recording philosophy, drama, poetry, and scientific inquiry. Plato's dialogues explored the nature of reality and justice. Sophocles and Euripides crafted tragedies that laid bare the human condition. Herodotus chronicled the histories of peoples and wars. All of these works were preserved in Greek letters, ensuring that the thoughts of one generation could speak directly to those yet unborn. The Greek language itself evolved, developing sophisticated vocabulary for abstract concepts. Words for democracy, philosophy, mathematics, and countless other ideas took shape in Greek. The alphabet that carried these words proved flexible enough to express both the concrete and the abstract, the simple and the complex. Meanwhile, in the Italian peninsula, another people were beginning their own journey with writing. The Latins were initially a small tribe among many in the diverse landscape of ancient Italy. Their city, Rome, perched on 7 hills beside the Tiber River, would grow from modest beginnings into something that would reshape the world. The Romans encountered the alphabet through their neighbors, the Etruscans, who had themselves adapted it from Greek colonists in southern Italy. Around 700 BCE, Latin began to be written using this alphabet. The earliest Latin inscriptions are brief, sometimes just names or simple declarations carved into stone or scratched onto pottery. Latin in its early form was practical, direct, suited to a people of farmers and soldiers. The language had a structured grammar with cases and declensions that allowed for flexible word order. A Latin sentence could be arranged in various ways, while still maintaining clarity of meaning, each word carrying grammatical information within itself. As Rome expanded from a city-state to a republic, Latin traveled with Roman soldiers, merchants, and administrators. The language absorbed vocabulary from the peoples Rome encountered, particularly from Greek. Greek culture held prestige in Roman society, and educated Romans often spoke both languages. Greek words for philosophical concepts, artistic terms, and scientific ideas flowed into Latin, enriching it. The Roman approach to their alphabet was characteristically efficient. They refined the letters they had inherited, standardizing forms that would become remarkably enduring. The monumental capitals carved into Roman architecture set a standard for clarity and proportion that architects and designers would admire thousands of years later. Latin inscriptions appeared throughout the growing Roman world, on monuments and milestones, on temples and tombs. The words Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, appeared again and again, a declaration of identity and authority. Yet even as Latin became the language of law and administration, it remained a living, changing tongue. spoken differently by common people in the streets than by orators in the forum. The great Roman writers shaped Latin into a vehicle for literature that could rival Greek achievements. Cicero crafted speeches of persuasive power and philosophical treatises. Virgil composed the Aeneid, an epic that traced Rome's mythical origins. Ovid's Metamorphoses wove together hundreds of myths into a continuous narrative poem. Each of these works demonstrated the expressive range that Latin had achieved. By the time of the Roman Empire, Latin had become the common language across a vast territory stretching from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Asia Minor. Local languages persisted, of course, but Latin served as the lingua franca, the shared tongue that enabled communication across cultures and regions. The Greek and Latin alphabets, though distinct, shared common ancestry and similar structures. Both had proven themselves capable of carrying complex civilizations' accumulated wisdom. Both had evolved beyond simple accounting or record-keeping to become mediums for humanity's highest intellectual and artistic achievements. In libraries and scriptoria, scrolls accumulated, preserving knowledge in Greek and Latin letters. Copyists painstakingly reproduced texts, ensuring their survival. The words written in these alphabets became bridges across time, allowing voices from one era to speak to another. Yet even as these classical languages reached their zenith, the seeds of change had already been planted. Languages are never static, and the forces that would transform both Greek and Latin were already at work across the ancient world. New peoples, new ideas, and new trade routes were weaving together, creating connections that would carry these alphabets and the languages they served into yet another chapter of their long journey through human history. The ancient pathways that connected distant civilizations were more than mere routes for merchants and their goods. They were rivers of language, carrying words across deserts and mountains, through bustling marketplaces and quiet caravanserais, from one culture to another, in an endless exchange that would reshape how humans communicated across vast distances. Imagine standing at the edge of the Great Silk Road as it stretched eastward from the Mediterranean ports, winding through Persia, crossing the wind-swept passes of Central Asia, and eventually reaching the distant cities of China. Along this network of trails, which truly consisted of many interconnected routes rather than a single road, traveled not just silk and spices, but something far more subtle and enduring: the vocabulary of human experience itself. A merchant from Syria might learn Persian words for textiles as he negotiated in the markets of Isfahan. Those same Persian terms would travel with him westward, mixing with Greek and Aramaic in the cosmopolitan trading centers of the Levantine coast. Meanwhile, eastward-bound caravans carried these words further, where they mingled with Sogdian, the lingua franca of Central Asian traders, and eventually reached the ears of Chinese merchants in the oasis cities along the desert frontier. The word for wine provides a particularly fascinating journey. From the ancient Mediterranean, variations of this term traveled eastward along the trading routes. The Persian may influenced the Sogdian word, which in turn made its way into Chinese vocabulary. Similarly, the Chinese word for tea would eventually travel the opposite direction, entering Persian as che, and later evolving into countless variations as it spread to Russia, India, and eventually Europe, where it became tea in English and thé in French. Depending on which Chinese dialect, and which trading route brought it westward. These exchanges were not random but followed patterns as predictable as the movement of the caravans themselves. Trade routes created what we might think of as linguistic corridors, where certain types of words flowed more easily than others. Terms related to commerce, precious goods, animals, and numbers crossed boundaries readily because traders needed this vocabulary to conduct their business. A merchant who could count in multiple languages and knew the words for gold, jade, precious stones, and fine textiles in half a dozen tongues had a distinct advantage in the marketplaces that dotted the ancient world. The oasis cities that served as resting points along the Silk Road became remarkable centers of linguistic diversity. In places like Samarkand, Bukhara, or Kashgar, you might hear conversations in Sogdian, Persian, Turkish, Chinese, and Indian languages, all within the same marketplace. The interpreters and multilingual merchants who facilitated communication in these centers played a role we can scarcely imagine today, serving as living bridges between civilizations that might otherwise have remained incomprehensibly foreign to one another. Religious travelers added another dimension to this linguistic exchange. Buddhist monks traveling from India to China carried Sanskrit and Pali texts, introducing religious and philosophical vocabulary to new regions. As Buddhism spread along the Silk Road, words related to meditation, enlightenment, and spiritual practice were translated and adapted into Chinese, creating new terms that tried to capture concepts that had never before been expressed in that language. Chinese translators sometimes had to invent entirely new characters or give old characters new meanings to convey these ideas from distant India. The maritime routes that connected ports from the Mediterranean through the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia and China created similar linguistic highways on the water. Arab sailors and merchants, navigating by the stars and seasonal monsoon winds, carried Arabic vocabulary to ports in India, Sri Lanka, and the islands of Southeast Asia. Words related to navigation, ship construction, and maritime trade spread through these seafaring networks, often showing remarkable similarity across vast distances. Persian served as a particularly important bridge language during many centuries of Silk Road trade. At various times in history, knowledge of Persian could carry a traveler from the borders of the Ottoman Empire all the way to the courts of India. Persian poetry, literature, and administrative vocabulary influenced Turkish, Arabic, and the languages of Central Asia and India. Even today, languages across this vast region share Persian loanwords, echoes of centuries when Persian culture and commerce reached across continents. The exchange was never one-directional. While we often think of goods and ideas flowing from east to west or west to east, the reality was far more complex. Chinese innovations and vocabulary related to papermaking, printing, and silk production traveled westward. Indian mathematical concepts and the numeral system we still use today spread both east and west along trading routes. Arabic advances in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine carried terms and concepts in multiple directions, enriching languages across 3 continents. Food vocabulary particularly demonstrates how trade routes shaped language. The Arabic word for orange, naranj, traveled into Persian, then Greek, and eventually reached Europe. The word for spinach moved from Persian into Arabic, then into European languages. Chinese words for various types of noodles and preparation methods spread along both land and maritime routes. Each time a new food arrived in a region via these trading networks, the word for it often traveled along too, sometimes in recognizable form, sometimes transformed by the sounds and structures of the receiving language. Even the names of faraway places carried a certain magic as they passed from language to language. China was known by different names depending on which route and which era one considers. Cathay came through Central Asian languages, while China itself may derive from the Qin dynasty, the name traveling through Persian and Arabic before reaching Europe. Similarly, the various names for Rome, India, and Persia transformed as they passed through different linguistic territories, each culture adapting foreign place names to fit their own sound patterns. Technical vocabulary related to manufacturing and crafts also traveled these routes. As artisans learned new techniques from distant lands, they often adopted the vocabulary along with the skills. Terms related to metalworking, glassmaking, textile production, and ceramic arts moved along trade routes, sometimes remaining remarkably unchanged, other times evolving to fit new linguistic context. As we rest here in this quiet moment, imagine the patient movement of these words across landscapes of sand and stone, their meanings carefully preserved by merchants, translators, and travelers who understood the value of communication across cultural boundaries. The Silk Road was not just a commercial venture, but a vast, centuries-long conversation between civilizations. Each word carried across its length a small bridge of understanding between peoples who might never meet, but whose languages would forever bear traces of these ancient exchanges. The legacy of these linguistic highways remains embedded in the languages we speak today, silent testimony to a time when human voices carried words slowly across continents, one careful traveler at a time. As the ancient trade routes carried precious silks, fragrant spices, and gleaming gems between distant civilizations, they also carried something far more enduring: the Sanskrit language and its profound influence across the Indian subcontinent. Let us now turn our attention eastward, away from the bustling caravansaries of the Silk Road, to explore one of humanity's most sophisticated linguistic traditions. In the river valleys of ancient India, around 1500 years before the Common Era, a language was taking shape that would captivate scholars for millennia to come. Sanskrit emerged from the Indo-European language family, carried into the Indian subcontinent by migrating peoples who gradually settled in these fertile lands. The word Sanskrit itself means perfected or refined, and this name would prove remarkably fitting for a language that would be analyzed, codified, and preserved with extraordinary precision. The earliest form of Sanskrit appears in the Rig Veda, a collection of sacred hymns composed and transmitted orally across countless generations before anyone thought to commit them to writing. Imagine the dedication required to preserve thousands of verses purely through memory and recitation, with priests carefully teaching each syllable, each accent, each pause to their students. This oral tradition demanded absolute accuracy, for these were not merely words but sacred sounds believed to hold power when pronounced correctly. The language of these early Vedic hymns possessed a complexity that seems almost musical in its structure. Sanskrit could arrange its words in remarkably flexible patterns, thanks to a system of 8 grammatical cases that indicated the role each noun played in a sentence. A single word might transform through dozens of forms, each subtle variation conveying a different shade of meaning or grammatical function. This flexibility allowed poets and philosophers to craft verses of extraordinary sophistication, where meaning could unfold in multiple layers. As centuries passed and the language evolved, something remarkable occurred in ancient India. Scholars began to study their own language with scientific rigor. Around the 4th century before the Common Era, a grammarian named Panini composed a text called the Ashtadhyayi, which analyzed Sanskrit with a precision that would not be matched in linguistic study for over 2,000 years. Panini's work consisted of nearly 4,000 sutras, or concise rules, that described how Sanskrit words were formed and how they functioned in sentences. What made Panini's achievement so extraordinary was not merely its completeness, but its methodology. He created what we might call an algorithmic system, using abstract symbols and formalized rules that could generate correct Sanskrit forms from basic roots. Imagine describing an entire language through a set of logical principles so elegant that modern computer scientists have studied his work with admiration. Panini identified the smallest units of meaning, explained how sounds changed when they came together, and showed how complex words could be built from simpler components through systematic processes. This scholarly tradition meant that Sanskrit became remarkably stable over time. While spoken languages typically transform beyond recognition across centuries, Sanskrit remained largely unchanged in its classical form, preserved by the careful attention of generations of scholars and priests. It became a language of learning, philosophy, science, and literature, even as various vernacular languages continued to evolve in daily speech across the diverse regions of India. The Indian subcontinent, of course, was never home to just one language. Sanskrit existed alongside a rich tapestry of related tongues, collectively known as Prakrits, which people spoke in their daily lives. These Prakrits were simpler in structure than Sanskrit, more fluid in their evolution, and varied considerably from region to region. From these Prakrits would eventually emerge the modern languages of northern India: Hindi, Bengali, Marathi, Gujarati, Punjabi, and many others, each developing its own character while retaining Sanskrit words in their vocabularies, much as English retains Latin and Greek. In southern India, the linguistic landscape was different still. Here flourished the Dravidian language family, entirely separate in origin from the Indo-European family to which Sanskrit belonged. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam developed their own rich literary traditions, though they too would eventually borrow extensively from Sanskrit's vast vocabulary, particularly for abstract concepts, religious terms, and scholarly discourse. Sanskrit served as a bridge between these diverse linguistic regions. A scholar in Bengal could communicate with a philosopher in Kerala through Sanskrit, even if their native tongues were mutually incomprehensible. In this way, Sanskrit functioned across the Indian subcontinent somewhat as Latin did in medieval Europe, a learned language that transcended local vernaculars and provided a common medium for intellectual exchange. The influence of Sanskrit extended far beyond the borders of India itself, as Indian culture, religion, and ideas spread along trade routes to Southeast Asia. Sanskrit traveled with them. In lands that would become Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Malaysia, local rulers adopted Sanskrit names and titles. Inscriptions carved in stone bore Sanskrit verses. Even today, many words in Thai, Khmer, Javanese, and other Southeast Asian languages trace their origins to Sanskrit, particularly in domains related to religion, government, and high culture. The writing systems used for Sanskrit also tell a fascinating story. The earliest Vedic hymns existed only in oral form, but as writing became more common in India, various scripts emerged to record Sanskrit texts. The most influential was Devanagari, which means script of the divine city. This graceful writing system, with its hanging horizontal line connecting characters, would eventually become the standard not only for Sanskrit, but for Hindi and several other modern Indian languages. Each character in Devanagari represents a consonant with an inherent vowel sound, which can be modified through additional marks, an elegant solution that reflects the phonetic sophistication of Indian linguistic thought. Sanskrit literature encompasses an astonishing range of works. Religious texts like the Vedas and Upanishads, exploring the nature of reality and consciousness. Epic poems like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, containing hundreds of thousands of verses. Plays by dramatists like Kalidasa that explored human emotions with remarkable subtlety, and treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and virtually every field of knowledge cultivated in ancient and medieval India. As we rest here in contemplation of Sanskrit's journey through time, we can appreciate how this ancient language represents something remarkable in human linguistic achievement. A tongue that was not only spoken and written, but deeply analyzed by its own speakers, who sought to understand the very principles that gave it structure and meaning. From the banks of the Ganges to the temples of Angkor, Sanskrit carried ideas and learning across vast distances and through countless generations. The story of Sanskrit reminds us that languages can serve many purposes simultaneously, as living speech, as sacred sound, as literary medium, as scholarly tool, and as bridge between communities. And as Arabic would soon demonstrate in a different corner of the ancient world, a language empowered by faith and learning could transform the intellectual landscape of entire civilizations. As we journey westward from the linguistic richness of the Indian subcontinent, we find ourselves in the vast Arabian Peninsula during a transformative moment in human history. The 7th century of the Common Era was dawning, and with it would come a language that would sweep across continents, carrying poetry, science, and philosophy to corners of the world previously unconnected by a common tongue. Arabic, as a language, did not suddenly appear with the revelations received by the Prophet Muhammad in 610 CE. Long before this pivotal moment, Arabic had been spoken by nomadic Bedouin tribes who traversed the desert landscapes of Arabia. These early speakers had developed a remarkably sophisticated oral tradition, with poetry holding a place of honor in their culture. Poets were celebrated members of society, their verses memorized and recited around campfires, their words flowing like water through the desert sands. The Arabic language itself seemed perfectly suited to this poetry. with its intricate system of root words and patterns that allowed for remarkable expressiveness and rhythm. The pre-Islamic Arabs had developed what we now call Classical Arabic. Though regional dialects varied across the peninsula, the language possessed a rich vocabulary for describing the desert environment, with numerous words for different types of sand, various states of camels, and the subtle gradations of the night sky. This linguistic precision reflected the intimate relationship between the people and their environment, where noticing such distinctions could mean the difference between finding an oasis and perishing in the wasteland. With the emergence of Islam in the 7th century, Arabic underwent a transformation that would elevate it from a regional language to one of global significance. The Quran, believed by Muslims to be the literal word of God as revealed to Muhammad, was recited in Arabic. This sacred text became the foundation for standardizing the language. Because the Quran was considered perfect and unchangeable, the Arabic in which it was written became a model of linguistic excellence. Scholars devoted themselves to preserving every nuance of pronunciation, every grammatical structure, every subtle meaning embedded in the text. As Islam spread beyond Arabia with remarkable speed, so too did the Arabic language. Within a century of Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Islamic civilization had expanded across the Middle East, throughout North Africa, into the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, and eastward towards Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Along this vast expanse, Arabic became not merely the language of worship, but the language of administration, commerce, and intellectual discourse. The expansion of Arabic was unlike many other instances of linguistic spread in human history. While conquerors often imposed their languages through force, Arabic spread through a more complex process. In many regions, local populations gradually adopted Arabic over generations, sometimes blending it with their existing languages, sometimes replacing their ancestral tongues entirely. The language offered practical advantages for anyone living under Islamic rule, opening doors to education, trade, and participation in the broader cultural world. By the 8th and 9th centuries, Arabic had become the preeminent language of learning across a vast empire, stretching from Spain to Persia. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its glittering capital in Baghdad, fostered an extraordinary period of intellectual flourishing. Scholars working in Arabic translated works from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and other languages, preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of ancient civilizations. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a legendary center of learning, where mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, and philosophers gathered to share ideas. Through Arabic, the world gained or regained access to Aristotle's philosophy, Ptolemy's astronomy, and Euclid's geometry. But these scholars did far more than simply preserve ancient knowledge. Working in Arabic, they made revolutionary advances in mathematics, introducing concepts like algebra, whose very name comes from the Arabic word al-jaba. They refined astronomical observations to remarkable precision, developed new medical treatments and surgical techniques, and explored optics, chemistry, and engineering with sophisticated methods. The Arabic language itself proved remarkably adaptable to this explosion of knowledge. Its grammatical structure, based on three-letter roots that could be modified in systematic ways, to create related meanings, allowed for the creation of precise technical terminology. When scholars needed words for new concepts, the language's internal logic provided mechanisms for generating them. This flexibility helped Arabic become the Latin of the medieval Islamic world, a common tongue that allowed scholars from diverse backgrounds to communicate complex ideas. As Arabic spread, it left lasting impressions on other languages, much as Sanskrit had influenced languages across South and Southeast Asia. Spanish and Portuguese absorbed hundreds of Arabic words during the centuries of Islamic rule in Iberia, from almohada for pillow to asita for oil. The prefix al, meaning the in Arabic, appears in English words borrowed through Spanish and other roots: algebra, alcohol, alchemy, alcove, admiral. Even words like cotton, sugar, coffee, and sofa trace their origins through Arabic, reflecting the goods and concepts that traveled along trade routes where Arabic was spoken. The influence flowed in multiple directions. Persian, which had its own ancient and proud literary tradition, absorbed Arabic vocabulary while maintaining its distinct grammatical structure and character. Turkish languages incorporated Arabic and Persian words as the Islamic world expanded northward. In East Africa, the Swahili language emerged as a Bantu language enriched with Arabic vocabulary, facilitating trade along the Indian Ocean coast. What makes the story of Arabic particularly remarkable is how the language maintained a unified classical form, even as it diversified into regional dialects. To this day, the Arabic of the Quran and classical texts remains the standard for formal writing and speech across the Arab world, even though the colloquial Arabic spoken in Morocco differs dramatically from that spoken in Iraq or Yemen. This diglossia, the coexistence of a high classical form alongside varied spoken dialects, has preserved a connection across vast distances and centuries. By the time we reach the medieval period, Arabic had reshaped the linguistic landscape across 3 continents. Libraries in cities from Cordoba to Cairo to Baghdad housed countless manuscripts in Arabic, preserving not just Islamic scholarship, but the accumulated knowledge of Greek, Persian, and Indian civilizations. When European scholars began seeking ancient texts during their own intellectual reawakening, they often found them in Arabic translations, carefully preserved by generations of scribes and scholars. The story of Arabic demonstrates how language serves not merely as a tool for communication, but as a vehicle for culture, learning, and connection across diverse peoples. As we prepare to turn our attention to how European languages were themselves transforming during these medieval centuries, we carry with us an understanding of how a language from the Arabian Peninsula became a bridge between ancient wisdom and future discoveries, between East and West, between the old world and new frontiers of human knowledge. As the Islamic Golden Age flourished across the vast territories where Arabic had taken root, the landscape of Europe was undergoing its own profound linguistic transformation. The grand edifice of Latin, which had once unified communication across the Roman Empire from Britannia to Mesopotamia, was slowly fragmenting into a mosaic of new tongues, each shaped by the peoples and places where it took root. In the centuries following the decline of Roman authority, Latin began its gentle metamorphosis. The language that scholars still carefully preserved in monasteries and courts was becoming increasingly distant from the words spoken by farmers in their fields. merchants in their markets, and families around their hearth fires. Classical Latin, with its precise grammatical structures and carefully ordered words, was giving way to what we might call the Latin of everyday life, the vulgar Latin that would become the mother of entirely new languages. Imagine a traveler in the 8th or 9th century journeying from the Iberian Peninsula through Gaul and into the Italian countryside. In each region, though the roots of speech remained recognizably Latin, the sounds and rhythms would shift like the changing landscape. The Latin spoken in Hispania was absorbing influences from the Visigothic rulers and retaining echoes of earlier indigenous languages. In Gaul, Germanic Frankish vocabulary was weaving itself into the Latin fabric. On the Italian peninsula, closer to Rome itself, the language remained somewhat more conservative, yet even here local variations flourished in different valleys and city-states. The isolation of communities played a profound role in this linguistic diversification. In an age when travel was arduous and most people lived their entire lives within a small radius of their birthplace, languages could evolve quite differently from one valley to the next. Mountain ranges like the Pyrenees and the Alps served as natural barriers, allowing communities on either side to develop their own distinctive ways of speaking. Over generations, these small differences accumulated like sediment, gradually building up until the Latin of Hispania, Gaul, and Italia had diverged into what we now recognize as Spanish, French, and Italian. The process was gradual, almost imperceptible to those living through it. A grandmother and her grandchild could understand each other perfectly, yet the Latin spoken in the grandmother's youth and the emerging Romance language spoken by her grandchildren's grandchildren would be mutually unintelligible. This gentle transformation occurred over centuries, each generation making small shifts in pronunciation, adopting new words, and simplifying or altering grammatical structures. Meanwhile, in the northern reaches of Europe, Germanic languages were following their own evolutionary paths. The Anglo-Saxons in Britain spoke dialects that would eventually coalesce into Old English. In Scandinavia, Old Norse served as the ancestor of modern Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian. Across the continental Germanic regions, various dialects evolved that would one day become German and Dutch. These languages shared a common ancestry distinct from Latin, reaching back to Proto-Germanic roots. Yet they too were diversifying in response to geography and cultural separation. The Slavic languages were similarly branching across Eastern Europe. From a common Proto-Slavic ancestor, communities developed distinct tongues as they settled different territories. The Slavs who established themselves in the Balkans, in the plains of Russia, and in the regions between Germanic and Byzantine spheres of influence, each shaped their languages to meet their needs and express their unique cultural perspectives. By the medieval period, West Slavic languages like Polish and Czech, East Slavic languages like Russian, and South Slavic languages like Serbian and Bulgarian had emerged as recognizable branches of the family tree. This period of linguistic formation was not merely about fragmentation. It was also a time of creative synthesis. When the Normans, descended from Vikings who had settled in northern France, crossed the Channel to conquer England in 1066, they brought their French dialect with them. The resulting fusion of Norman French with Anglo-Saxon English created a linguistic richness. that would characterize English for centuries to come. Common English folk continued to use Germanic words for everyday things, while the Norman rulers introduced French vocabulary for matters of law, governance, and high culture. This dual vocabulary would become one of English's most distinctive features. Trade routes and cultural exchanges continued to facilitate the movement of words across linguistic boundaries. Merchants traveling between Italian city-states and the Byzantine East brought Greek terms into Italian. The Hanseatic League, connecting trading cities around the Baltic and North Seas, created networks where Low German influenced Scandinavian languages and vice versa. Even in this period of relative isolation compared to later eras, languages were never entirely sealed off from one another. By the year 1000, the linguistic map of Europe had been redrawn, where once Latin had provided a common medium of communication across a vast empire. Now a rich tapestry of languages reflected the political and cultural realities of medieval Europe. Yet Latin itself had not disappeared. It remained the language of the church, of scholarship, and of international diplomacy. A learned person in Portugal could correspond with a scholar in Poland using Latin, even as their native tongues had diverged into entirely different language families. The monasteries and cathedral schools preserved not only Latin, but also began to document these emerging vernacular languages. Scribes started writing down songs, stories, and poetry in French, Spanish, Italian, and other tongues. The Song of Roland in Old French, the Cantar de Mio Cid in early Spanish, and Dante's Divine Comedy in Italian represented early monuments in these maturing languages, proving that the vernacular could express profound ideas and beautiful poetry, just as Latin had done. As the medieval period progressed toward its conclusion, these European languages continued to develop and refine themselves, preparing for the dramatic expansions and transformations that would come with the age of exploration. The seeds planted in these centuries of gradual change would eventually grow into the global linguistic landscape we recognize today. But in those quieter medieval centuries, in village squares and castle halls, in monasteries and marketplaces, the languages of Europe were finding their voices, each one unique, each one carrying forward echoes of Latin while creating something beautifully new. As the medieval world gave way to a new era of exploration, the languages of Europe were about to embark on journeys as ambitious as those of the sailors who would carry them. The 15th century marked a turning point in human history, when adventurous seafarers would set forth across vast oceans, bringing their words with them to distant shores. What followed would reshape the linguistic map of the entire planet in ways that those early explorers could never have imagined. The Portuguese were among the first to venture far beyond familiar waters, as their ships traced the coastline of Africa in the 1400s. Portuguese merchants and sailors established trading posts along the way. At each stop, their language mingled with local tongues, creating practical vocabularies for commerce and navigation. Portuguese words for trade goods, ship parts, and maritime activities began appearing in coastal African languages, while Portuguese sailors adopted local terms for unfamiliar plants, animals, and geographical features. When Vasco da Gama finally reached India in 1498, Portuguese became a language of trade throughout the Indian Ocean, leaving traces that remain in coastal communities from Mozambique to Malaysia to this day. The Spanish language followed close behind, but its journey took a different direction. When Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, he carried Castilian Spanish to islands in the Caribbean. Within a few decades, Spanish conquistadors had reached the mainland of the Americas, encountering civilizations with rich linguistic traditions of their own. The Aztec Empire spoke Nahuatl, a sophisticated language with its own complex grammar and extensive vocabulary. The Inca Empire communicated in Quechua, which served as a lingua franca across their vast Andean territories. The Maya regions contained a family of related languages with ancient literary traditions. The encounter between Spanish and these indigenous American languages was complex and multifaceted. Spanish speakers needed words for things they had never seen before: chocolate, tomato, avocado, and chili, all entered Spanish from Nahuatl. The alpaca and puma came from Quechua, while jaguar arrived through a chain of borrowings from South American languages. Meanwhile, millions of indigenous people learned Spanish, often maintaining their ancestral languages alongside it. This created a linguistic landscape where multiple languages coexisted, influenced each other, and evolved together. As Spanish spread across Mexico, Central America, and South America through the 16th and 17th centuries, it encountered hundreds of different indigenous languages. In some regions, Spanish became the dominant language of administration and education. In others, indigenous languages remained strong, creating bilingual communities. The Spanish that developed in the Americas was not identical to the Spanish of Spain. Different regions developed their own distinctive vocabularies, pronunciations, and expressions, influenced by local indigenous languages and the particular Spanish dialects that the colonizers had brought with them. Portuguese took a similar journey in Brazil, where it encountered Tupi and other indigenous Amazonian languages. Brazilian Portuguese absorbed words for local flora and fauna, while also developing its own unique character, distinct from European Portuguese. The language spread along the Amazon and into the interior, though many indigenous languages survived in more remote regions, preserving ancient ways of speaking about the rainforest environment. Meanwhile, French explorers and colonizers carried their language to different corners of the globe. French established itself in parts of Canada, where it interacted with indigenous languages like Algonquin and Iroquoian languages. French also reached islands in the Caribbean, parts of Africa, and later, Southeast Asia. In each place, French developed its own local characteristics, absorbing words and sometimes grammar features from the languages it encountered. The Dutch language, though spoken by fewer Europeans, also traveled globally. Dutch traders established posts in southern Africa, Indonesia, and the Caribbean. In South Africa, Dutch evolved into Afrikaans, a new language that incorporated influences from indigenous Khoi and San languages, as well as from Malay and other languages of enslaved peoples brought to the region. In Indonesia, Dutch left its mark on local languages, particularly in administrative and technical vocabulary. English began its global journey somewhat later than Portuguese or Spanish, but would eventually reach the farthest. English settlements in North America, beginning in the early 1600s, brought various British dialects to a land inhabited by hundreds of indigenous nations, each with their own languages. Words like raccoon, chipmunk, moose, and skunk entered English from Algonquian languages. Potato came from a Caribbean language through Spanish. As English colonies expanded, the language encountered French in Canada, Spanish in the regions that would become the southwestern United States, and countless indigenous languages across the continent. The impact of European languages on indigenous languages was profound and varied. Some indigenous languages disappeared entirely as communities were displaced, or as younger generations shifted to speaking colonial languages. Others persisted, especially in regions where indigenous populations remained numerous and their communities intact. In many places, new mixed languages emerged, combining elements of European and indigenous languages to create unique forms of communication. Along coastal trading regions, pidgin languages developed, simplified forms of speech that allowed people with no common language to communicate for practical purposes. This era of exploration also brought languages into contact across the Atlantic through the forced migration of millions of African people. They brought their languages with them, including diverse tongues from West and Central Africa. These languages influenced the Portuguese, Spanish, English, French, and Dutch spoken in the Americas, contributing words, grammatical features, and pronunciation patterns. In some regions, Creole languages emerged, fully developed languages that combined European vocabulary with African and sometimes indigenous grammatical structures. The linguistic exchanges of the age of exploration flowed in multiple directions. While European languages spread geographically, they were also transformed by their encounters with the rest of the world. European languages acquired thousands of new words for previously unknown plants, animals, foods, and cultural concepts. The vocabulary of European languages expanded dramatically as speakers needed terms for mahogany and tobacco, hurricane and canoe, banana and yam. As ships crisscrossed the oceans through the 17th and 18th centuries, they carried not just goods and people, but words. A term might travel from an indigenous language in South America to Portuguese, then to Dutch traders, and eventually to English in North America. Languages that had developed in isolation for thousands of years suddenly found themselves borrowing from tongues spoken on the other side of the world. This age transformed language from something primarily local and regional into something increasingly global. The patterns of linguistic spread and interaction established during these centuries would continue to shape how languages evolved, influencing which languages would grow in number of speakers and which would struggle to survive in the centuries to come. The world of language was about to undergo a transformation so profound that its effects would ripple through every corner of human civilization. In a workshop in Mainz, Germany, around the year 1440, a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg was perfecting a mechanical system that would change everything about how words traveled from one mind to another. Before this moment, books were rare treasures, painstakingly copied by hand in monasteries and scriptoriums. A single Bible might take a scribe months or even years to complete, their fingers cramping as they carefully formed each letter with quill and ink. The cost of such labor meant that books remained luxuries available only to the wealthy, to monasteries, and to universities. Knowledge was precious partly because it was so difficult to reproduce. Gutenberg's innovation combined several existing technologies in a new way, He adapted the wooden screw press, long used for making wine, and combined it with movable typecast from metal. Each letter was created as an individual piece that could be arranged, used to print many copies, and then rearranged into new words and sentences. The oil-based ink he developed adhered perfectly to the metal type and transferred cleanly to paper. The first major book printed with this new technology was a Bible, completed around 1455. These Gutenberg Bibles were remarkably beautiful, designed to rival the finest manuscripts that monks could produce. But the true revolution was not in their beauty. It was in their number. What once would have taken years of a scribe's labor could now be accomplished in weeks. Multiple identical copies emerged from the press, each one exactly like its siblings. As printing spread across Europe through the late 15th and early 16th centuries, something unexpected began to happen to language itself. When texts existed only as manuscripts, variations were natural and constant. Each scribe might spell words differently, following regional pronunciation or personal preference. There was no single correct way to write many words. A language like English existed in dozens of slightly different written forms across different regions and different scribes. Printing brought standardization through sheer repetition. When thousands of people read the same printed book, they encountered words spelled the same way again and again. Printers in major cities had to make choices about spelling, grammar, and vocabulary. Should they print night or night? Should they use the word center or center? Whatever choices the printers made would be reproduced hundreds or thousands of times, gradually establishing those forms as standard through constant exposure. The impact on spoken language was more subtle, but equally significant. As people learned to read from printed books, they began to associate specific spellings with specific pronunciations. Regional dialects began to seem like deviations from a printed standard, rather than equally valid ways of speaking. The language of the capital city, where the most influential printers were often located, gained prestige because it was the language that appeared most frequently in print. In England, London, English became increasingly influential as printers like William Caxton, who established England's first printing press in 1476, made choices that would echo through centuries. Caxton himself worried about which dialect to use. He told a story about a merchant asking for eggs, but the woman he asked understood only the word iron. Both words meant the same thing in different dialects, but which should appear in printed books. The printer's choices helped determine which words would survive and which would fade away. Latin had long been the language of scholarship and the church across Europe, but printing helped elevate vernacular languages to new status. When books could be produced more cheaply and in greater numbers, there was economic incentive to print in the languages that most people actually spoke. Italian, French, German, Spanish, and English works began to pour from printing presses, creating bodies of literature in these languages that gave them new legitimacy and stability. The spread of printed texts in vernacular languages helped forge national identities. When people across a large territory all read books in the same standardized language, they began to think of themselves as sharing something fundamental. A person in northern England and one in southern England might speak quite differently, but when they read the same printed English, they participated in a common linguistic culture. Religious conflicts accelerated these changes. When Martin Luther translated the Bible into German, and his translation was printed and distributed widely beginning in 1522, it helped establish a standard form of German that transcended local dialects. Luther chose to base his translation on the language of the Saxon Chancellery, a form of German that speakers from different regions could understand. The enormous popularity of Luther's Bible meant that millions of German speakers encountered this standardized language, which influenced how they wrote and eventually how they spoke. Similar patterns occurred across Europe. Printed religious texts, whether Protestant Bibles in vernacular languages or Catholic materials responding to the Reformation, required decisions about standardization that had lasting effects. The technologies of printing and the politics of religion combined to shape the languages we know today. Dictionaries began to appear, attempting to catalogue and standardize vocabulary. These were not merely reference works, but prescriptive statements about which words were proper and how they should be spelled. In 1604, Robert Corddry published A Table Alphabetical, considered the first English dictionary, containing about 2,500 words with brief definitions. It was designed to help people understand hard words, but it also implicitly established which words were legitimate parts of the language. The printing press also accelerated the borrowing of words between languages. As books were translated and read across linguistic boundaries, words for new concepts and technologies spread more rapidly than ever before. Technical vocabulary from one language could appear in printed texts in another language, where readers would encounter and adopt these foreign words. The pace of linguistic exchange, which had accelerated during the Age of Exploration, became faster still. As printed newspapers began to appear in the 17th century, they created new demands for standardization and new opportunities for language to evolve. Journalism required clarity and consistency. Editorial choices about language in widely read publications influenced the language of thousands of readers. The weekly or daily rhythm of newspapers meant that new words and expressions could spread through a population with remarkable speed. By the time 2 centuries had passed since Gutenberg's first press, the languages of Europe had been transformed. They had become more standardized, more codified, and more closely tied to national identities. The era of purely oral dialects, varying from village to village, was giving way to an era of print-based standard languages, and these standardized languages would soon travel around the world with even greater force as they began their journey toward becoming the global languages we know today. As the printed word spread across Europe and began to standardize languages through the power of the press, one language in particular was embarking on a remarkable journey that would eventually carry it to every corner of the globe. English, which had begun as the speech of Germanic tribes on a foggy island, would transform itself again and again, absorbing influences from every direction, until it became something unprecedented in human history, a truly global language. The story of English's rise begins not with grandeur, but with humility. In the centuries following the Norman conquest of 1066, English had been the language of common people, while French dominated the courts and Latin ruled the church. For nearly 300 years, English remained in the shadows, spoken by farmers and labourers, slowly absorbing French words for law, government, and refined living, while retaining its Anglo-Saxon core for everyday matters. A person could eat beef or mutton at dinner, using French-derived words, but the animals in the field remained the Saxon cow and sheep. By the time Geoffrey Chaucer wrote his Canterbury Tales in the late 1400s, English was beginning to reassert itself. Chaucer's decision to write in English rather than French or Latin was itself a statement, a declaration that this hybrid language could express sophisticated ideas and tell compelling stories. Yet the English Chaucer wrote would seem strange to modern ears. Its spelling inconsistent, its grammar still in flux. This Middle English existed in numerous dialects, and a person from northern England might struggle to understand someone from the south. The printing press, which we encountered in our previous chapter, played a crucial role in shaping what English would become. When William Caxton set up his printing press in Westminster in 1476, he faced an immediate challenge. Which dialect of English should he use? He largely chose the language of London and the surrounding areas, the speech of commerce, and the emerging middle class. With each book he printed, this form of English became more fixed, more standard. Spelling began to settle into patterns, even if those patterns didn't always make logical sense. The word night kept its silent letters, preserving a memory of how it once was pronounced centuries earlier. The Renaissance brought a flood of new words into English as scholars rediscovered classical texts and sought vocabulary to express complex ideas. Latin and Greek roots were grafted onto the English tree in abundance. Words like education, architecture, and democracy entered the language, often sitting alongside older English words with similar meanings. This created the rich layering that characterizes English. We can ask or question, rise or ascend, end or conclude, with subtle differences in formality and tone. William Shakespeare, writing and performing during the reign of Elizabeth I, both reflected and shaped the English of his time. The language he used, what we now call early modern English, would sound somewhat foreign to us with its different pronouns and verb forms, yet it's largely comprehensible. Shakespeare's genius for coining new words and phrases left an indelible mark. Eyeball, lonely, assassination, and countless others first appeared in his work, along with expressions like break the ice and wild goose chase that remain in use today. The publication of the King James Bible in 1611 further standardized English and gave it a majestic register that would echo through the language for centuries. Phrases from this translation wove themselves into everyday speech. The skin of my teeth, a labor of love, the writing on the wall. The rhythms and cadences of the King James Bible influenced how English sounded when spoken with gravity and purpose. But it was the expansion of English beyond Britain's shores that truly transformed the language into something global. As English speakers established colonies in North America, the Caribbean, and eventually Australia and New Zealand, the language traveled with them, adapting to new environments and absorbing words from the peoples they encountered. From Native American languages came canoe, tobacco, tomato, and chocolate. The colonies developed their own patterns of speech, their own vocabularies for new experiences and landscapes. The American Revolution created a nation that would play an enormous role in spreading English worldwide. Noah Webster, with his American Dictionary of English Language, published in 1828, deliberately sought to distinguish American English from British English, simplifying spellings and documenting distinctly American words and usages. Color lost its U, center became center, and the language began to travel down parallel but related paths on opposite sides of the Atlantic. The British Empire at its height in the 19th century spread English across a quarter of the world's surface. In India, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, English became a language of administration and education. In each place, it mingled with local languages, creating new varieties of English, enriched with local vocabulary and expressions. Indian English, Nigerian English, Singaporean English. Each developed their own character, while remaining mutually intelligible with other forms of the language. The Industrial Revolution and the rise of global trade made English increasingly important as a language of commerce and technology. The first telegraph messages, the first telephone calls, much of the early terminology of modern industry emerged in English and was often adopted wholesale by other languages. Words like railway, telegraph, and later computer and internet spread from English into languages worldwide. The 20th century saw English's dominance accelerate. American economic and cultural influence after World War II brought American English to the forefront of global consciousness. Hollywood films, American music, and later American television programs carried English into homes around the world. The language of international aviation became English. Scientific papers were increasingly published in English. International business adopted English as a common tongue for negotiations between people who spoke different native languages. Yet this rise to global prominence came with complexity. English didn't replace other languages, so much as sit alongside them, creating millions of bilingual and multilingual speakers who code-switched between English and their native tongues. The language continued its ancient pattern of borrowing, taking words from Japanese, Hindi, Arabic, Spanish, and countless other sources. Karaoke, yoga, safari, and patio entered English as naturally as French words had centuries before. The flexibility of English, its willingness to absorb vocabulary from anywhere, its relatively simple grammar compared to many languages, and the economic and cultural power of English-speaking nations all contributed to its spread. By the end of the 20th century, more people spoke English as a second language than as a native tongue, and the language had become a tool for global communication unlike any language before it. As we move forward into an age of even greater connection, where science and technology accelerate the pace of change, English finds itself at the center of rapid linguistic evolution, adapting to digital communication and global exchange in ways we're only beginning to understand. As English spread across the globe, carrying with it the voices of merchants, colonists, and adventurers, another transformation was taking place in the quiet laboratories and universities of Europe. The 17th and 18th centuries brought an age of reason and inquiry, a time when humanity turned its gaze toward the natural world with new instruments and fresh questions. This era of scientific awakening would require something that existing languages had not fully developed: precise terminology for discoveries that had never before been named. The scientists and philosophers of the Enlightenment found themselves in a curious predicament. They were observing phenomena, conducting experiments, and formulating theories about everything from the motion of planets to the circulation of blood. Yet, they lacked adequate words to describe what they were discovering. Latin, the traditional language of European scholarship, had served well for centuries, but even its extensive vocabulary could not keep pace with the flood of new knowledge pouring forth from workshops, observatories, and dissection chambers. And so, language began to evolve in a new direction. Rather than growing organically from the mouths of common people going about their daily lives, scientific language was deliberately constructed. Scholars reached back into the classical languages of Greek and Latin, extracting roots and combining them in novel ways to create words that had never existed before. The word telescope, for instance, emerged from Greek roots meaning far-seeing, while microscope meant small-seeing. These weren't words that ancient Greeks had used. They were new creations built from old building blocks. This process of word building accelerated throughout the 18th century. In chemistry, Antoine Lavoisier revolutionized not only the science itself, but also its vocabulary. Before his systematic reforms in the 1780s, chemical substances had colorful but confusing names like butter of arsenic or oil of vitriol. Lavoisier introduced a logical naming system based on composition and properties. Oxygen came from Greek roots meaning acid former, based on his theory about the element's role in acids. Hydrogen meant water former. Though some of his theories would later be revised, his approach to naming substances created a framework that chemists still use today. Biology, too, demanded new precision in language. Carl Linnaeus, working in Sweden in the mid-18th century, developed a systematic way to name living things using Latin binomial nomenclature, two-part names that identified each organism's genus and species. This system allowed naturalists from different countries speaking different languages to communicate clearly about the same plant or animal. A rose might be called rose in English, rosa in Spanish, and rose in French. But in scientific discourse, it would be rosa, followed by its species name, understood by scholars everywhere. The beauty of this approach lay in its universality. As scientific knowledge spread beyond Europe to Asia, the Americas, and eventually across the entire globe, researchers needed a common vocabulary that transcended national boundaries. Greek and Latin provided neutral ground, languages that belonged to no living nation's political ambitions, yet were part of the educational heritage of scholars worldwide. Medical terminology expanded dramatically during this period as well. Physicians had long used Latin terms, but the acceleration of anatomical knowledge required ever more specific language. Each newly identified bone, muscle, nerve, and blood vessel received its own designation. Many of these terms were beautifully descriptive. The hippocampus in the brain was named for its supposed resemblance to a seahorse, while the stirrup bone in the ear took its name from its shape. Meanwhile, languages adapted to accommodate mathematical and physical concepts. Isaac Newton, writing his Principia Mathematica in Latin in 1687, introduced concepts like gravity and inertia that would need to be expressed in vernacular languages as well. The word gravity itself came from Latin gravitas, meaning weight or heaviness, but Newton gave it precise scientific meaning. As his ideas spread, each European language had to decide how to express these concepts. Some borrowed directly from Latin, while others created native equivalents. The 19th century witnessed an explosion of scientific specialization, and with it, an even greater proliferation of technical vocabulary. Geology, paleontology, bacteriology, electromagnetism. Each new field of inquiry spawned hundreds of new terms. The word dinosaur was coined in 1842 by Richard Owen, combining Greek roots for terrible lizard. Electricity derived from the Greek word for amber, which ancient Greeks had noticed could attract small objects when rubbed. This scientific vocabulary didn't remain confined to laboratories and learned journals. As scientific ideas filtered into popular consciousness through lectures, exhibitions, and eventually mass education, these specialized terms entered everyday language. People who had never studied formal science might speak of germs or evolution or electricity, using words that hadn't existed in common speech a century before. Interestingly, the flow of scientific terminology wasn't entirely one way from classical languages into modern ones. As science became a global endeavor, words from various living languages contributed to the scientific lexicon. From Japanese came tsunami and umami, precise terms for phenomena that other languages had described only approximately. Arabic contributed alcohol and alkali, remnants of medieval Islamic chemistry that had preserved and expanded upon ancient knowledge. The process of creating scientific language also revealed something profound about how human minds organize knowledge. Scientists needed not just names for individual things, but systematic ways to express relationships, processes, and abstract concepts. The development of chemical notation, mathematical symbols, and classification systems showed that language could be structured with almost mathematical precision when necessary. Yet even as scientific language became more specialized and technical, it remained unmistakably human. Scientists name newly discovered elements after their homelands: germanium, polonium, francium, or after mythological figures and celestial bodies. They honored their predecessors by attaching names to units of measurement: watts, volts, amperes, joules. These naming choices reflected national pride, personal relationships, and cultural heritage, reminding us that even the most objective-seeming scientific endeavor is carried out by people embedded in particular times and places. By the end of the 19th century, scientific terminology had become a vast, interconnected system of precisely defined words, most built from Greek and Latin components, allowing researchers across the world to communicate with unprecedented clarity about the natural universe. This specialized vocabulary would continue to grow exponentially in the 20th century, but the foundations had been laid during the age when language met science, when human curiosity demanded new words to match new understanding. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the world stood on the threshold of a transformation in human communication. that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. The languages that had evolved over thousands of years, shaped by migrations, conquests, and gradual cultural shifts, were about to experience change at a pace never before witnessed in human history. The 20th century began with most people living in relatively isolated communities, speaking languages much as their grandparents had spoken them. Regional dialects flourished, and a person's speech could identify not just their country, but often their specific town or valley. Yet within just a few decades, voices would travel across oceans in an instant, and the barriers that had kept languages separate would begin to dissolve in remarkable ways. The invention of the radio in the early 1900s marked the first great leap in this transformation. For the first time in human history, a single voice could reach millions of listeners simultaneously. When radio broadcasts began in earnest in the 1920s, they created something unprecedented: standardized pronunciations and vocabularies that reached into homes across entire nations. A farmer in rural Kansas and a shopkeeper in New York City could hear the same announcer speaking the same words with the same pronunciation at the same moment. This shared linguistic experience began to smooth out some of the regional variations that had characterized languages for centuries. Radio announcers developed what became known as broadcast standards in various languages. In the United States, a relatively neutral accent emerged that avoided the strongest regional characteristics. In Britain, the BBC English became a model of pronunciation. Similar patterns developed in French, German, Spanish, and other major languages as national broadcasting systems took shape. Yet this standardization was gentle rather than absolute, and regional diversity continued to add richness to each language. The influence of radio extended beyond pronunciation. New words entered everyday speech as people heard them broadcast into their homes. Technical terms related to radio itself, words like broadcast, wavelength, and frequency, took on new meanings. The language of advertising evolved as companies learned to sell products through the spoken word alone. Radio dramas created new forms of storytelling that relied entirely on dialogue and sound effects, pushing languages to be more descriptive and evocative. When television arrived in the decades following World War II, it added visual context to the standardizing influence of broadcast media. Now people could see as well as hear how others spoke. Television created shared cultural references across vast populations. Phrases from popular programs entered everyday conversation. Characters and their catchphrases became part of the collective vocabulary. A successful television show could introduce new expressions that spread across a language community within weeks. The post-war period also saw unprecedented movement of people across borders. Economic migrations brought speakers of different languages into daily contact in ways that created new linguistic blends. Turkish words entered German as guest workers settled in German cities. Caribbean and South Asian vocabulary enriched British English. Spanish increasingly flavored American English, particularly in regions with large Hispanic populations. These weren't invasions or conquests driving language change, but rather the peaceful mingling of peoples and their ways of speaking. International organizations that emerged after the World Wars created needs for translation and interpretation on scales never before attempted. The United Nations, established in 1945, adopted 6 official languages and required simultaneous interpretation of proceedings. This practical necessity drove innovations in translation techniques and created new awareness of how languages could express the same ideas in fundamentally different ways. The work of translators became increasingly sophisticated as they sought not just to convert words, but to convey meanings, nuances, and cultural contexts across linguistic boundaries. Air travel, which became accessible to ordinary citizens by the 1960s, transformed languages by bringing speakers from different parts of the world into direct contact. Tourism created simplified forms of communication and generated whole vocabularies related to travel, hotels, and international experiences. People who had never traveled beyond their home regions in previous generations now returned from distant countries with new words and phrases absorbed from brief encounters with other languages. The telephone, which had existed since the late 19th century, became ubiquitous in developed countries by mid-century. This technology changed the nature of conversation itself. People learned to communicate without facial expressions or gestures to aid understanding. Telephone conventions developed, ways of answering, identifying oneself, and saying goodbye that varied across cultures, but also showed similarities. The telephone created new needs for clarity in speech and contributed to language becoming more explicit in its verbal content alone. As the century progressed, English increasingly became the lingua franca of international business, science, and diplomacy. This wasn't a sudden shift, but rather a gradual process driven by various factors including American economic and cultural influence, the legacy of British colonialism, and practical choices made by international organizations and businesses. Scientists publishing research found that English language journals reached the widest audiences. Airlines and air traffic controllers adopted English as their common language for safety reasons. International conferences defaulted to English when participants came from diverse linguistic backgrounds. This spread of English as a common second language created interesting phenomena. Varieties of English emerged that mixed local languages with English vocabulary and grammar. Nigerian English, Indian English, and Singaporean English each developed distinctive characteristics. These weren't inferior or broken forms of English, but rather creative adaptations that served the needs of multilingual communities. They demonstrated the endless flexibility and adaptability of human language. The late 20th century saw the rise of global brands and advertising that crossed linguistic boundaries. Companies carefully adapted slogans and brand names to work across languages, sometimes keeping English phrases even in non-English markets, because they conveyed a sense of international sophistication. Other times, they discovered that names and phrases that worked well in one language created unfortunate meanings in another, leading to careful attention to cross-cultural linguistic implications. Meanwhile, many smaller languages faced increasing pressure as mass media, education, and economic opportunity often favored major languages. Younger generations in some communities stopped learning their ancestral tongues. Linguists began documenting languages that might disappear within a generation or two, recognizing that each lost language represented a unique way of understanding and describing the world. Yet this same period also saw growing appreciation for linguistic diversity. Movements emerged to preserve and revitalize endangered languages. Communities created immersion schools and documentation projects. Technology began offering tools to record and teach languages that had never been written down. As the 20th century drew to a close, languages had been transformed by 100 years of unprecedented connection and communication. The stage was set for an even more dramatic acceleration of change, as digital technologies would soon connect billions of people in ways that would make even the remarkable changes of the 20th century seem modest by comparison. As we arrive at the present moment in our journey through the story of language, we find ourselves in an era unlike any before. The turn of the 21st century brought with it a transformation so rapid and comprehensive that linguists today speak of living through a linguistic revolution in real time. The digital age has woven itself into the very fabric of how we communicate, introducing changes that would have taken centuries to unfold in earlier eras, but now emerge within mere years or even months. The internet arrived quietly at first, connecting universities and research institutions in the late 20th century. But as it expanded into homes and businesses worldwide, it created something unprecedented in human history. A space where millions of people could read, write, and communicate across vast distances instantly. For the first time since the origin of language itself, written communication began to approach the speed and informality of spoken conversation. Email replaced letters, chat rooms allowed real-time typed exchanges, and the boundaries between written and spoken language began to blur in fascinating ways. This new form of communication demanded innovations. When we write quickly, trying to match the pace of speech, we naturally seek shortcuts. The 1990s saw the emergence of abbreviations that would become part of digital vocabulary. LOL for laughing out loud, BRB for be right back, and countless others emerged from the practical need to type quickly on keyboards. These weren't random inventions, but organic linguistic evolution happening at the speed of technology. Young people, often the most adaptable to new communication forms, drove many of these changes, creating what some called net-speak or text-speak. The mobile phone revolution accelerated these trends exponentially. When text messaging became popular in the early 2000s, the constraints of tiny keyboards and character limits fostered even more creative linguistic adaptation. Numbers replaced words where they sounded similar. GR8 for great, 2 for two or two, 4 for four. Letters dropped from words to save precious space. Languages around the world developed their own texting conventions, each reflecting the unique characteristics of the underlying language. In China, numbers took on special significance because Chinese digits can sound like words, creating an entirely new layer of communication. Then came the era of social media, beginning with platforms like MySpace and Facebook, expanding to Twitter, Instagram, and countless others. Each platform shaped language in its own way. Twitter's original 140-character limit created an art form of brevity, where every word counted and compression became essential. Hashtags emerged as a new grammatical element, simultaneously categorizing content and adding commentary. The hashtag transformed from a simple organizational tool to a form of expression itself, capable of irony, emphasis, and social commentary. Emojis and emoticons represent perhaps one of the most intriguing linguistic developments of the digital age. These small pictographic symbols began as simple sideways faces made from punctuation marks, but evolved into elaborate systems of hundreds of standardized images. In some ways, they represent a return to elements of pictographic communication. echoing the early writing systems we explored at the beginning of our journey. Yet they serve a unique purpose in digital text, conveying tone, emotion, and context that might be lost in brief written messages. A simple smiley face can transform the meaning of a sentence entirely, serving almost as digital body language. The digital age has dramatically accelerated the pace at which words enter languages. New terms emerge constantly from technology itself. Podcast, blog, streaming, cloud, viral, trending. Each innovation brings new vocabulary. Social media platforms become verbs. We Google information. We tweet thoughts. We Zoom with colleagues. Brand names transform into common words with remarkable speed, a process that once took decades now happening in years. Languages borrow from each other more freely in this connected world. English contributes heavily to digital vocabulary worldwide, with terms like selfie and spam adopted into numerous languages. Yet the flow moves in multiple directions. Japanese contributed emoji to English. Korean gave us mukbang for online eating broadcasts. Words spread globally through viral videos, memes, and shared online culture, creating an increasingly interconnected linguistic landscape. The internet has also become a vast repository of linguistic diversity. Communities speaking minority languages have found digital spaces where they can connect, share, and preserve their linguistic heritage. Online dictionaries, digital archives, and social media groups dedicated to endangered languages offer new tools for language preservation. Young speakers of indigenous languages create content in their ancestral tongues, from YouTube videos to Twitter threads, ensuring these languages remain living, evolving forms of communication rather than museum pieces. Yet challenges exist alongside these opportunities. The dominance of certain languages online, particularly English, raises questions about linguistic diversity in digital spaces. Some worry that the informal writing styles of digital communication might affect formal language skills, though linguists generally recognize that people successfully code switch between different communication contexts, using casual digital language with friends and formal language in professional settings. Machine translation has progressed remarkably, allowing people who speak different languages to communicate with increasing ease. While still imperfect, these tools break down language barriers in ways previous generations could barely imagine. Artificial intelligence now generates human-like text, raising profound questions about the nature of language itself and the relationship between human communication and machine processing. The digital age has also made us more aware of language itself. Online debates about grammar, word usage, and language change play out publicly, with people around the world discussing the evolution of their languages in real time. Dictionaries add new words annually, documenting emerging usage with unprecedented speed. We watch language change before our eyes, chronicled in social media posts, search trends, and viral phenomena. Looking toward the future, we can only imagine how language will continue to evolve. Voice interfaces and artificial intelligence may shift us back toward more spoken forms of digital communication. Virtual and augmented reality might create entirely new contexts requiring novel linguistic conventions. Global communication might lead to further convergence of languages, or, paradoxically, to new appreciation and preservation of linguistic diversity. As we rest here at the end of our journey through the story of language, from those first meaningful sounds uttered tens of thousands of years ago to the emoji-laden messages sent today, we can marvel at the continuity underlying all this change. Humans remain fundamentally the same creatures who gathered around ancient fires to share stories. We still use language to connect, to share knowledge, to express emotion, to build communities. The tools change, the speed accelerates, but the deep human need to communicate persists, as constant as the stars above and as vital as breath itself. The story of language continues, written now by billions of voices across a connected world, each adding their words to humanity's endless, evolving conversation. As we bring to a close our journey through the remarkable story of language, from those first spoken words echoing in ancient caves to the rich tapestry of thousands of languages weaving across our world today, we hope this exploration has gently carried you toward rest. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful voyage through human expression and connection. If these calm reflections have brought you comfort, we'd love to have you with us again. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below to help other smart sleepers find their way here. And now, as the night deepens and your mind settles into quietness, we wish you the sweetest of dreams. Good night, fellow dreamer, and may your sleep be restful and your dreams be kind.